Hi everyone, please subscribe to my channel. Blood Immortal Venerable. See playlist for other chapters and novels. I do not translate the novels. Credits goes to original translator and author of the novel. I only make it as an audiobook so it would be easier to just listen while doing other things. Credits goes to the author of the novel. I convert stories to audiobook for mental health, for multitasking purpose, for accessibility and time saving. Listening to audiobook is also beneficial for people who have disability. It improves our listening skills and improve our English comprehension, vocabulary and other things. So, thank you for listening. Thank you and thank you very much for your support. Chapter 2981, Being Overbearing. As his hand clutched, Adonis grasped at the flying saber. Putting an invisible force on the weapon, his grip tightened. But Elvenia took advantage of the opportunity and moved away, quickly putting distance between herself and Adonis. When Elvenia saw Zen, her eyes turned glassy as she practically pounced on him. She thought she was done for. In the Oneness Sky Palace, she hadn't suffered any setbacks. It was in the dark region where she had first undergone a truly terrible thing, her memory flame was disturbed. But after she recovered, her struggles were all in the past and she managed to calm down as she digested her memories once again. Such memories were truly unforgettable. After entering the chaotic source world, she wanted to find Zen immediately and stay with him. In all the time she had been there, she traveled across the chaotic source world. But she had almost died. While it wasn't Zen's fault, she couldn't help but put some blame on him in her heart. Elvenia's reaction even shocked Zen. But it was natural, as she was in a critical situation mere seconds ago. If he had arrived even a little later, Elvenia would have already been cut into pieces. Enveloping Elvenia in an embrace, Zen patted her back gently. Adonis held two sabers in his hands, wearing a nasty sneer on his face when he saw Zen. A hero came to save the beauty just in time. He shouted mockingly. Zen pushed Elvenia behind him and uttered coldly, "This is the second time." For a moment, Adonis and the rest had no clue what he was talking about. "This is the second time you people have offended me," Zen continued. "First, I was previously attacked by Briley and Leslie from the Sun Crow race. Now, you intend to challenge me as well." Unable to hide it, Adonis frowned at Zen's words. As the two strongest demon women among their peers in the Sun Crow race, Briley and Leslie were highly difficult to deal with in battle. If Zen had encountered them before, he should have already been dead. How could he be standing before them, safe and sound? "Are you saying you have encountered Briley and Leslie? Why would they let you off?" Adonis asked coldly. For some reason, there was a bad feeling in his chest. Before entering the chaotic source world, both the Bearing race and the Divine Farmer race took the disciples from the Oneness Sky Palace as their prey. It was then that the warriors from these races not only planned to reach the chaotic source realm, but also aimed to kill every single person on the hit list. Every time they eliminated someone, their race gave them great incentives. Killing Zen and Elvenia, in particular, would make them garner even greater rewards. As for Leslie and Briley, they would never have let Zen off so easily, not unless they were in their graves. They didn't. The corners of Zen's mouth curled into a smile. "They're already dead." His answer had the elites of the Bearing race and the Divine Farmer race tremble as they took a step backward. Now, they were on high alert. Zen managed to kill even Leslie and Briley. If that was so, he had proven himself to be a troublesome opponent. But Adonis' brows shot up as he laughed. "Don't brag. How naive of you to think you can frighten us with such words." But Elvenia chimed in, "They were indeed killed. I sensed it with my own blood." The demon women of the divine lair could feel each other's existence. But in spite of that, Elvenia didn't take it to heart when she sensed Leslie's and Briley's death. At this point, she had nothing but hatred for the demon women and hoped for their death more than anything. People from the Divine Farmer race and the Bearing race knew that the demon women of the divine lair had the blood of the Sun Crow race flowing through their veins, and that they had the ability to sense each other's presence. What Elvenia said confirmed Zen's words. The elite disciples of the two races took another step back. When Adonis realized that those from his race behind him were backing away, fury grew on his face. To do so in front of their opponents was the greatest taboo. Adonis believed that they must be too cowardly and useless. "What are you so afraid of? Elvenia is in Zen's league. Are you really going to believe her words? Such fools." Adonis turned to Zen and said coldly, "This kind of person always appears to be tough on the outside, but I bet he is a timid coward on the inside. The more he brags, the guiltier he feels. He's bluffing, he just wants us to retreat." But Zen merely shook his head. "I didn't mean that. Do you want to beg for mercy, now?" Ha ha, I'm afraid that's impossible, Adonis mocked him, laughing. At the gate of the chaotic source world, everyone could clearly see that Fuxi had done everything to protect Zen. It wasn't a wise move for them to attack Zen outside. If they wanted to avoid any big disputes or trouble, killing Zen within the chaotic source world was their best bet. No, Zen shook his head as a sharp light emitted from his eyes. I'm telling you now that anyone who dares to offend me must die. I will never let a member of the Bearing race, the Divine Farmer race, the Sun Crow race, or the New Moon race reach the chaotic source realm. His words had Adonis and his group utterly shocked, while Sally, Hyam and Elvenia grinned in satisfaction. They never expected Zen to be so aggressive and overpowering, it certainly pleased them. And it wasn't a baseless statement, he had his powerful strength supporting him. He wasn't merely being arrogant. A bad feeling grew worse in Adonis' heart. His instincts told him that he had just offended someone that he shouldn't have. But he couldn't just take a step back from his position. Neither his strength nor his aura allowed him to lose to Zen. But just then, the black smog above the chaotic source world began surging once again. If the hurricane blew anytime soon, the battle would come to an end. A hint of a grin flashed across Adonis' face as he said, "It seems that this battle will have to be postponed. We can then fight in the core area of the chaotic source world." Indeed, the wind would soon be too strong for anyone to fight. When they arrived at the core area of the chaotic source world, Khalid and his other companions were also there. With them, it didn't matter how strong Zen was. He was no match for all of them. Adonis sighed in relief. The several disciples of the Divine Farmer race and the Bearing race were in the same boat. But suddenly, Zen turned his head and ordered, "Hyam, Elvenia, start digging a hole." "Wait for me." Elvenia and Hutton were at a loss. Zen was showing no sign of giving up. But the hurricane was soon approaching. What was he planning? Sally and Hyam got a clue instantly. Because Zen could freely travel through the hurricane, he would gain the advantage over those idiots and kill them easily. Without any more hesitation, Hyam made a huge hole in the ground. "Zen," Elvenia said worriedly, "the wind is too strong. You'll be blown away again. I don't think it's a good idea." It wasn't easy for her to see him, so of course, she didn't want him to leave just like that. "Don't worry," Hyam interjected. "Zen will be back." Then, he took the lead and jumped right into the hole, flashing a sinister smile at Adonis and the rest as though he was looking upon dead men. Chapter 2982, Begging for Mercy. Despite her confusion, Elvenia still jumped into the crater along with Hyam and the others. It bewildered Adonis to see Zen remain standing outside the crater. What does he want to do? Is he planning to hunt me in the hurricane? He started to feel nervous at the sight of Hyam's smiling face. There was no way for ordinary warriors to fight in the hurricane. Why was Zen so calm? Did he have any special method? The other elites were as baffled as Adonis. As the black smog surged violently, the hurricane finally rolled in again. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. As expected, Adonis and his companions were all pulled up into the air by the hurricane. At that point, Zen jumped up lightly and followed the hurricane. The hurricane was heading north, but Zen was moving to the west. He was not affected at all by it. Seeing that, Adonis's eyes narrowed into slits. How could this be? Elites from the Bearing race and the Divine Farmer race felt their hearts sink. This hurricane was as strong as 3,000 to 4,000 divine megatons of force. It was so strong that nobody who had entered the chaotic source world previously could resist it. They either found a cave, or made a crater in the ground to hide themselves in. Otherwise, they would be swept away by the hurricane. And there had been no exception, until now. Only a few winged creatures could ride the wind, such as the Sun Crow race, but even for them, it was impossible to go against the wind. What is he doing? Is he chasing after us? But he can't catch up. It's impossible. They took solace in the fact the hurricane blew at a very fast speed, pulling them several miles away in the blink of an eye. As Zen was not pushed by the hurricane, it would naturally slow him down, they thought. But they forgot Zen could control his movements freely. After he rushed westward for a distance, he was right behind them. As the feather on his head flashed a cyan light, a huge shadow of cyan wings sprouted on his back. Phew, Zen was now moving with the hurricane. Bolstered by the hurricane, he moved at a faster speed. After about 10 seconds, he had already caught up to an elite from the Divine Farmer race. The elite was stricken with horror seeing Zen lunging at him like an eagle. He wanted to fight back, but it was extremely difficult for him to maintain a stable position in the wind. He spun around and shot 2 flying shuttles of purple light toward Zen. The wind slowed the shuttles down. Zen easily dodged them with a move of his body. Just as the elite moved to activate his other shore token, a sword radiance flashed at him and cut him in half. This scene drove other elites to despair. Let's split up. If he catches up to us, we'll be all doomed. They all tried to flee in the same direction, expecting the hurricane's heavy winds to do the work of scattering them. If they used their bodily movement skill to move forward, they would be separated faster. But Zen's explosive speed was still beyond their expectations. No sooner had they made the decision to split up when Zen appeared behind them and killed the second elite disciple of the divine farmer race before he could even react. Realizing that there was no way to escape, the remaining two elites gave up the idea. They immediately activated their other shore tokens to counterattack wildly. But now Zen could fight in the hurricane like a fish in water. Even if the two elites fought back with all their might, it only took Zen a few seconds to defeat them. Puff, puff. With a few flashes of sword radiance, the two elites were killed. Blown by the hurricane, their blood quickly dissipated into a mist and was covered by the black smog in the blink of an eye. Now, only Adonis was left. If he had been confident enough to defeat Zen before, he would have dug a hole at the same place and just waited for the hurricane to pass before he challenged Zen. However, after hearing what Zen and Elvenia said, he had already given up the idea of challenging Zen. When the hurricane came, he panicked as he witnessed Zen casually flitting around in the hurricane. He immediately activated his bodily movement skill and darted forward with the wind. Adonis's movement technique was extremely outstanding. Although he was not as good as the winged creatures like the Sun Crow race, he was by no means inferior to them. Thus from the beginning, he left the others far behind. After he had been fleeing for quite some time, he had looked back and saw that the several elite members who had followed him had been killed. Zen was now rushing toward him, picking up speed. How fast! His blood ran cold, but he would not be as helpless as the others. With a wave of his hands, he connected his sabers and flipped his body in the wind. Splash! Serrated blades emerged around him. Go! He yelled. The blades, which were spinning quickly, darted out. Swoosh! 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 Countless blades flew at Zen, containing extremely terrifying power in each. An ordinary warrior at the other shore realm would definitely avoid such aggressive blades. That was what Adonis wanted. As long as Zen slowed down to evade, he would be able to escape. From the very beginning, he had always hunted the disciples from the Oneness Sky Palace as his prey. But facing Zen, he realized that the roles had been reversed. He could tell from Zen's words that he would kill them and members of the Sun Crow race, the Divine Farmer race, the Bearing race and the New Moon race. None of them would be spared. Cling, cling, cling. The sharp tinkling sounds behind him broke into his thoughts. He turned around and gasped in shock at what he saw. Zen even didn't block the blades with his sword. He directly resisted them with his own body and smashed through them. What was his body made of? How could it be so strong? Even a powerful warrior of the separate Abyss race wouldn't be able to do that. Go to perdition. Adonis spun faster and threw more blades toward Zen. The attack proved futile in slowing down Zen in any way. He blocked all the blades easily. Zen quickly rushed over until he was hovering above Adonis. He held his long sword and looked down at Adonis. No matter how fierce the hurricane was, the hair on his head kept still. The feather of Wing King was shielding him from the wind's effects completely. Spare me, I can't die, Adonis pleaded, shouting to be heard above the din of the hurricane. He had been cornered. He had no choice now but to beg Zen for mercy. He felt so ashamed and helpless. If it weren't for the hurricane, he would have been able to take Zen on instead of being completely under his mercy like this. It's too late for regrets, Zen said coolly. He swung his long sword, bearing down with the wind and slashing at Adonis. Puff! Blood blossomed around the sword radiance as Adonis's body was swept away by the wind. Zen, who was hovering at great speed, paused mysteriously. He remained floating in the wind for a few moments before turning back where he came from. Chapter 2983, The Main Peak. Elvenia was still worried. She had never seen Zen stand upright in the wind before. What if he couldn't return? Luckily, she, Hutton, and Sally were able to check his soul mark and sense his position. In the beginning, Zen had moved in sync with the wind. But before long, he began to fly backward against the wind. How? Elvenia said, covering her mouth in astonishment as she turned to Hutton and Sally while leaning against the corner of the crater. But Hutton was as shocked as Elvenia. Even those who had just reached the chaotic source realm found it hard to stand firm for long in such a heavy wind, let alone to go against it. How did Zen make it? But she knew his soul mark would never lie to her. Zen was really approaching them. I'm afraid Zen has already killed them. He didn't turn around until now, said Sally, chuckling and looking at her brother and Elvenia. Sally and Hyam had experienced a similar event before, so she understood Elvenia's shock pretty well. It was not long before Zen floated towards them above the crater and slowly descended into it. Elvenia's eyebrows rose as she took in his countenance. "What happened to those people?" she asked. "I've killed them," Zen replied flatly. The hurricane had been of great help to him. And once the hurricane had come along, there had been no match for him. It had only taken Zen less than 3 minutes since the hurricane showed up. He had left to hunt, killed them off one by one, and returned, all of it in such a short period of time. What was more, Adonis was as powerful as Hyam and Elvenia. Elvenia and Hutton looked at Zen with new respect in their eyes. They had previously thought that Zen was powerful but on the same level as Hyam and Ephraim. They had regarded him to be just a little stronger than them. But now, Zen had, in such a casual, easy way, killed a talent at this level. He had matched up to those at the chaotic source realm. But everyone knew that Zen hadn't reached the chaotic source realm. Hyam sighed and smiled, feeling lucky that he was not Zen's enemy. Fortunately, Zen was on the side of the Oneness Sky Palace. He would have been a terribly formidable enemy if he were from the Bearing race or the Divine Farmer race. And Hyam knew he'd meet a sticky end as Adonis did if he were to confront Zen. Elvenia had previously fought with Zen in the Phoenix Palace, but the strength that he was showing now was much greater than what he had showed then. She suspected that he had become stronger because of the civilization artifact he had obtained from the Dark Region. When Eastern Emperor Tai had later summoned Elvenia, he had asked her to tell him everything that she had seen in the Dark Region. She had remembered everything after she had fully restored her memory. The civilization artifact had chosen Zen instead of her. Elvenia didn't regret any of it. She knew that if it weren't for Zen, she wouldn't have been able to leave the Dark Region. Instead, she was happy to see Zen grow into a powerful warrior. They continued to inch towards the core after they crawled out of the crater. They had encountered some alien races along the way, but they had just carefully avoided them at the sight of Zen among them. Most of the creatures aimed at reaching the chaotic source realm and wouldn't compete in vain. A few small races even tried to seek protection from Zen, but were rejected. Zen was aware that some of the small races were connected to the Bearing race or the Sun Crow race. He didn't want to keep any danger like that man of the lofty mountain race around himself. The core of the chaotic source world was a ring-shaped mountain range. These brown mountains shot up into the sky like sharp swords. The highest peak was located at the center of the annular mountain range. It was over 100 million feet high, almost reaching the top of the chaotic source world. There are tens of thousands of mountains in the core area, but most of the chaotic source spirits gather on the main peak and its 4 surrounding peaks. The main peak has the largest number of chaotic source spirits, said Hyam. Zen stood on a big rock that was as tall as 2 people standing, one on the other's shoulder, and looked at the magnificent main peak. He said, "Then let's go straight to the main peak." "No," said Hyam, shaking his head. "Why not?" Zen asked. Both Sally and Hutton looked at Hyam in confusion. Like Zen, they didn't know much about the chaotic source world either. As a creature from the other shore, the chaotic source spirit is different from other creatures from the source world. They are independent individuals and will grow up after devouring their peers. The mother of the chaotic source spirits is on the main peak, Elvenia explained. The mother was the one that had first given birth to the chaotic source spirits. The longer it remained in the source world, the stronger it would be. In the early days, someone had gone to the main peak to look for chaotic source spirits. But as the mother became increasingly powerful, the main peak became more dangerous by the day. In recent decades, very few people had gone to search for the chaotic source spirits on the main peak since the 4 peaks around it had offered much reaping and in a safer way. But most of the chaotic source spirits are on the main peak. "Wouldn't it be a waste if we didn't enter it?" Zen asked curiously. All he knew was that there were only 200,000 chaotic source spirits in all, and that was far from enough for those who entered the chaotic source world. "Yes, it is. The chaotic source world is so huge that it's impossible to dig out all the chaotic source spirits every time. But if we kill the mother, I'm afraid some powerful warriors will have to fuse with chaotic source spirits on the other shore, and bring them to the source world. And that's going to be big trouble," said Hyam, wearing a smile on his face. In fact, every time the chaotic source world opened, only about 100,000 chaotic source spirits would be swallowed. This number shrank gradually with each time. However, the fewer the chaotic source spirits devoured, the faster they could be recovered, up to 200,000 of them. In the early days, the chaotic source world opened once every 15 years only because too many chaotic source spirits were being devoured, and they took a long time to recover. Zen glanced at the towering main peak through the black smog. Since Hyam and Elvenia had filled him in about it, he would, at least for now, not aim at it. In addition to the main peak, there were also 4 peaks in 4 directions around it. They walked west, encountering the easternmost peak first. "Okay, our goal is the eastern peak," said Sally, stretching out an arm and pointing at the destination. She and Hutton were confident enough to step into the chaotic source realm. After all, they had Zen with them. People smiled and nodded before heading for the eastern peak. They chose to take a radian route, walking northward before going west. Zen had noticed that Dorothy was moving at the beginning, but was later fixed in the northwest after having remained unmoving for several hours. She should have been hiding and waiting for him. Zen appreciated her smart move. He wasn't about to leave her behind and enter the core area alone. But the situation was shades different from what Zen had imagined. Chapter 2984, Provocation. The group made their way north, and with the help of the soul mark, they had found Dorothy. To their surprise, she was in a naturally formed cave with an underground stream, not a large pit as they had thought. A strange look crossed Zen's face as they neared the entrance to the cave. Dorothy should have been able to sense Zen's presence through the soul mark. If she had, she needn't have stayed in the cave any longer. There was no hurricane, no danger at all. She should have come out to meet him by now. But the soul mark showed that Dorothy still remained motionless in the cave. How very unusual. Zen had a bad feeling about this and charged into the cave as his body tingled in concern. As he entered, an unmistakably strong scent of blood rushed to his nose. He raised his eyebrows as his concern mounted higher and sped up in his pace through the cave. The underground stream ran red with blood and broken limbs, some belonging to humans, some not. The stomachs of Hyam and the others following behind Zen turned at the sight of this wretched scene. They had entered into a similar cave before, with a similar scene. Back then, all but one member of the separate abyss race were dead. The only good news right now was that Dorothy's soul mark still existed. She was alive, but how or where she was still to be discovered. Whoosh! Zen, like a bat flying in the night, dashed through the incredibly complicated cave with speed and ease. "Dorothy, please be safe," Zen prayed sincerely from the depths of his heart. When he had gotten about 10,000 feet deep into the cave, what he saw shocked him even more than before. The bodies of more than a dozen disciples of the Oneness Sky Palace and over 100 non-human creatures piled up in a large gruesome mound before him. Connor. Zen saw Connor, with his eyes open wide, lying on the edge of the pile of corpses. His body was stiff and the fear on his face was obvious. He had died miserably. Ephraim, following closely behind Zen, Hyam had found Ephraim's body, lying there lifeless. Before Zen had joined the Oneness Sky Palace, Ephraim and Hyam were the 2 most gifted disciples of the younger generation. They had been close, and so the sight of Ephraim's corpse left Hyam distraught. He never would have imagined that with Ephraim's considerable strength, he would have died before even entering the core area. Sally tried to comfort him, but he was inconsolable. The 6 members of the 9 Li race were much luckier than these disciples. At the very least, their soul marks hadn't disappeared. They still wandered around the periphery of the chaotic source world. Umar was making his way towards them, although he was being slowed by the hurricane. Zen gritted his teeth and pulled those corpses out of the pile. He violently tossed one corpse after another aside. Once they had all been moved, a bloody figure emerged from beneath them. It was Dorothy. She sat motionless on the ground, her long hair dyed red with blood and her eyes shut firmly. 4-legged snakes coiled around her head. "It's the evil god," Hyam blurted out when he saw the 4-legged snakes. They had seen these same 4-legged snakes before. Zen checked Dorothy's body and a tinge of relief washed over him. Fortunately, she was not hurt. She didn't even have any wounds. But the 4-legged snakes had formed a barrier around her and had sealed her in. "How do we remove these 4-legged snakes?" asked Sally, frowning. When the member of the separate abyss race had tried removing them, it had caused him extreme pain. He decided he would rather patiently and slowly clean them off himself than let anyone else help him. "Let me have a try," Zen said cautiously. For the member of the separate abyss race, the 4-legged snakes had lain on his wounds, but Dorothy had none. The misery on her face was, however, unavoidable. Zen reached out and grabbed a snake. With a gentle squeeze, the snake was crushed into pieces. The circle formed by the black 4-legged snakes was broken. Suddenly, they moved, and jumped at Zen's face. Zen reacted quickly and calmly, slapping them to pieces and turning them into energy currents. Dorothy's body began trembling as she slowly woke up. She began breathing fast and retreating on her arms, kicking her feet as she slid backwards. "Don't come closer. You can't kill me," she screamed wildly. People like Elvinia and Dorothy had been given some powerful latent thurges before entering the chaotic source world. However, the latent thurges would only be triggered at fatal moments. Because of this, Dorothy was not afraid of the evil god. She believed that no matter how powerful he was, he would have no choice but to run away in panic once the latent thurge her grandma gave her was activated. But she had not anticipated the possibility that he had no intention of killing her. He had just sealed her on the spot and covered her in corpses. "It's me. Look closely, Dorothy. It's Zen," Zen said loud. Dorothy's soul had been sealed for a fair amount of time. Even after being freed, she was still caught in a daze. She studied the man in front of her carefully, bit her lips and rushed towards Zen with tears in her eyes. This took Elvinia by surprise. Dorothy had it much worse than she did. "It was the guy from your inner world," Dorothy said pained. "I know," Zen replied nodding. After a long while, Dorothy calmed down. "The evil god has killed so many people. Why did he let Dorothy off?" Hyam asked confused. When the member of the separate abyss race had escaped disaster, it was with his own strength and ability, not because the evil god had shown him mercy. Dorothy was confused too. She had gone all out in her fight with the evil god. She had used her other shore token, the twin blossoms, and given all she had with the origin swordsmanship, but she was still no match for him. She never thought she'd make it out alive. "It's a provocation," Zen said as he stared at Dorothy. He did it on purpose to send a message. The evil god had seen Dorothy standing beside Zen at the gate of the chaotic source world. Perhaps this was why he did not kill her and only sealed her beneath the corpses. Such an act was nothing but a provocation. "He is a freak," said Elvinia, frowning in disgust. The killing intent in the depths of Zen's eyes grew stronger and stronger. He silently helped Dorothy rub off the blood stains from her body. Although he said nothing, all around him felt his intense killing intent. In the chaotic source world, Zen and the evil god were bound to clash. But the strength of the evil god had them all deeply concerned. Once the blood stains had been removed, Hyam stored the bodies of Ephraim and the other Oneness Sky Palace disciples in his space ring. It was an undeserved fate to come face to face with the terrible and unreasonable evil god. With that, the group left the cave. Chapter 2985, The Clanging Sound. After the other four members of the Nine Li race sensed that Zen, Hutton and Sally had banded together, they set out for the eastern peak at a breakneck pace. Luckily, they had safely crossed the periphery of the chaotic source world, and were close to the core area. Umar was the furthest away. He was near the western peak, but was moving towards them now. Right now, all the super forces that had entered the chaotic source world were gathering together. The Bearing race, the Divine Farmer race and the Sun Crow race gathered on the western peak, the separate Abyss race on the northern peak, and some minor races on the southern peak. When Zen, Dorothy, Elvinia and the others approached the eastern peak, more than 10 ear mice suddenly emerged from a large hole near them. All of the ear mice were half as tall as a person. Each of them had a strong aura, and their black soybean-sized eyes reflected shrewdness. "Master Zen, I'm Darth. I've waited a long time." The long-haired ear mouse in the lead walked over to Zen and raised its paws to salute him. Zen glanced at the ear mice. It seemed that they wanted something from him. He asked, "You were waiting for me here?" "Yes," replied Darth. "How did you know where I was?" Zen asked curiously. No one knew where they would be after the hurricane came and stopped. Zen was naturally suspicious. "Well," Darth put its paw to its mouth and blew, creating a strangely pitched whistle. Not far away, tiny mice emerged from fist-sized caves. Darth laughed and said, "The chaotic source world is teeming with lives. The rock mice serve us." The ear mice weren't that powerful compared to the other races, but they were unparalleled when it came to spying. The rock mice of the chaotic source world also worked for them. "I see." A look of relief appeared on Zen's face as he asked, "What do you want from me?" Zen had once allied himself with the ear mice on the other shore. Although the ear mice had failed to explore the Grand Sky Temple, and had even been drained of strength, it was not Zen's fault. Moreover, Zen sent back the souls of the ear mice that had transformed into cubs. "I have a proposition," said Darth. "Let's explore the eastern peak together." The ear mice thought Zen was a good guy to have around in a fight. Although they couldn't prove that Zen was really Thad, it sure looked like they were the same person. Even if they weren't, the mice figured that there must be some connection between the two men. Zen, Hyam, Elvenia and the others looked at each other, and they nodded their assent. The ear mice were a race that could not be ignored. The information they acquired was extremely useful. It seemed foolish not to take them up on their offer. However, Darth was a little worried about Zen's suspicious attitude as it stared at Zen with its soybean-like eyes. "It's an honor to be with you," Zen replied. Hearing Zen's words, the ear mice heaved a collective sigh of relief. The rock mice that lived in the chaotic source world were very weak. When the hurricane started blowing, they burrowed deep into the mountain caverns, so they didn't see Zen kill the non-human creatures from the divine lair and Adonis from the bearing race. However, with all the information they gathered, they could come to that conclusion easily. But they were confused. How did Zen kill those creatures when the hurricane raged all around him? More incredibly, Zen returned to where he had been after the battle, which meant he could fly against the hurricane. The ear mice were itching to solve the mystery, but it was considered rude to ask him outright. Zen might not be willing to tell them, so they had to fight down the urge to ask. Maybe he would reveal more secrets if they were exploring together as allies. Just as everyone was preparing for another journey, Zen asked, "The rock mice work for you?" "That's pretty handy. I want to know where two certain individuals are. Can you help me out?" Darth gave a smile and squeaked, "Let me guess. You want to know where Yan and the evil god are?" "Right, Master Zen." The ear mice were quite shrewd. They knew exactly who Zen was talking about. They even knew the young man in black was called the evil god. "Yes," Zen said, nodding. Apparently, the pair Hill knew of the change in the chaotic source world. They have been prepared for the violent hurricane and they're on the western peak. "The evil god is in the north," Darth replied. "Is he heading for the northern peak?" Zen raised his eyebrows. An indescribable expression appeared on Darth's face. "No, he's got murder on his mind." The ear mice had never seen such a bloodthirsty person. The evil god was not interested in the chaotic source spirit at all. The only thing he did in the chaotic source world was kill anyone he came across. Nobody could stop him. He had killed many important figures. These people were the first-class talents of the major races. Although the evil god had killed so many, he never stopped. Now he was going through the members of the separate abyss race. But it was a good thing for the ear mice. The evil god had killed many of their enemies, and they could avoid the evil god with the help of the rock mice. The members of the separate abyss race are quite powerful. "The evil god," Zen remarked, frowning. Each member of the separate abyss race possessed superb vitality and strength, not to mention a sturdy corporeal body. The race was domineering and powerful and couldn't be ignored. "But those guys are in dire straits now," Darth said, shaking its head. At the foot of the northern peak, blood ran like a stream through the gap in the rock. The men and women of the separate abyss race were over 100 feet tall, like giants. After more than a dozen of them were torn apart, blood continued to seep out and flowed like a river. On the hillside, 4 members of that race still stood. They were the strongest, the best of the best. They were the top talents in Thurgy, body and other shore tokens. They stared at the evil god hovering in the air. Their leader coldly asked, "We have nothing against you. Why kill us like this?" "Why?" An aura of malice surrounded the evil god as he smiled. "I want to hear the clanging sound. That sound is pleasing to the ear and gets me all excited." The clanging sound? What was that? The 4 members of the separate abyss race looked at each other, puzzled. They couldn't understand what the evil god meant. "That sound is a special one. It tolls when one gains a reward. It means I'm growing stronger. Ha ha ha." As the evil god spoke, he suddenly waved his hands and a black void materialized, enveloping the 4 members of the separate abyss race. The 4 members were very powerful. They couldn't be dealt with by normal means, so the evil god had to show his trump card. When the black void descended, the voice of the evil god came again. "Don't fight it. You're too weak to comprehend what's happening. Go to perdition." Chapter 2986, Gaining Nothing. The mountains at the foot of the eastern peak formed a natural, flat path. There, Zen had the members of his team stop for some time. Through the soul marks, he could sense the 4 members of the 9 Li race, including Umar, were approaching him. About 15 minutes later, 3 joined his team. The last one, however, didn't get close. He seemed to have been blown by the hurricane about 100,000 miles away. "There's no need to wait for Oswald. Let's go," Hutton said decisively. In the chaotic source world, everyone could reach the chaotic source realm by virtue of their own strength. There was no way so many of them could just stop and wait for a single person. Meanwhile, Darth raised its paws and whistled, causing hundreds of rock mice to crawl out from both sides of the mountain path. They scurried into the cave below the eastern peak at its command. As the rock mice led the way, they could detect not only the danger in front of them but also the general direction of the chaotic source spirits. It was indeed convenient. That was why all the large races preferred traveling with the ear mice. But this time, the ear mouse race found Zen of their own accord and joined him. The cave in the eastern peak was wide open with a flat passageway that spiraled upward. Zen walked to the front and spread his spiritual sense. In the face of some protruding rocks and pillars, Zen and his people hit them with all their strength. Boom, boom. After several tries, they found it rather easy to break the rocks and pillars into pieces. As it turned out, there was no chaotic source spirit at this place. Squeak, Master Zen, these rock mice look weak, but they can bite and break common rocks. The chaotic source spirits exist in the rocks that they can't break, Darth reminded. When Zen scanned the nearby rocks, he found tiny teeth prints left by the rock mice. Clearly, Zen hadn't completely believed what the ear mouse had just told him. If they discovered any chaotic source spirits, they could simply hide them from the public and come back to take them away later. Isn't it said that most of the chaotic source spirits gather in the 5 peaks? Zen asked curiously. Even Darth was puzzled. That is indeed the case. There should be many chaotic source spirits even at the entrance. But it looks like something went wrong this year. The rock mice seemed to be searching for the chaotic source spirits rapidly. They bit and dug into rocks all the way down into the cave so as to not miss any. Although in theory, they should have confronted some powerful ones by now, they hadn't met any such one yet. After spiraling over 100,000 feet up the cave, they couldn't find a single chaotic source spirit. It was an odd situation indeed. It was not only Zen who thought it abnormal. The races who explored the northern peak, the western peak, and the southern peak had also encountered the same problem. It was known that once they entered all the 4 peaks, they should have gained many chaotic source spirits. But not even a single one was to be found. After all of them climbed to the top of the mountain from the cave, their eyes fell on the main peak in the very center, which was as sharp as a sword. The only possibility is that all the chaotic source spirits are gathered in the main peak, Darth said to Zen. The latter examined the structure and asked, so we can only enter the main peak? In all these years, very few people have gone there. Now, all the chaotic source spirits are hiding up there. I wonder what kind of monster they have transformed into after fusing with each other, Hayam figured. Although he seemed rather playful and carefree, Hayam was, by nature, a very cautious person. Every warrior had to reach the chaotic source realm if they wanted to grow more powerful. But it was unwise to risk all their lives for it, and waiting another 10 years wasn't a big deal, after all. But we can't just retreat now. Hutton frowned. They had traveled long to get where they were, so how could they give up so easily? I don't think the others will give up right away. Zen looked up to the black smog in the sky. First, we have to avoid the hurricane. Then, we can take a look. It was no easy task for the races to reach the core area, so naturally, none of them were willing to leave just yet. No matter how dangerous the main peak was, they were eager to see what lay there. But the outside of the chaotic source world was already in an uproar. All the core disciples and talents of the super forces had been guaranteed absolute safety. Almost all of them were equipped with powerful latent theurgies, but many of the excellent warriors had died in the chaotic source world. Who killed our crown prince? The celestial wolf race's leader grimaced with red eyes. Our young master is a rare talent. How could he die? It's impossible. Many of the members from various races had died in the chaotic source world, each of them being extraordinary warriors. It wasn't a normal occurrence. By rights, it should have been likely for them to reach the chaotic source realm. The celestial wolf race's leader's head suddenly shot up as he roared to the sky. The Pear Hill owes us an explanation. Yes, what on earth is going on with the hurricane in the chaotic source world? Back then, we built the chaotic source world in order to compete with each other. If we knew a huge group of warriors would die, we should all just distribute the entirety of the chaotic source spirits, shouldn't we? This chaotic source spirits could be controlled. Because of the unequal distribution of these chaotic source spirits, the chaotic source world was built. On the one hand, the members of the races could receive training, while on the other hand, they could obtain the chaotic source spirits with their own strength. But this time, too many warriors had died all at once. Their deaths far exceeded the leader's expectations and they couldn't bear it. Squeak. Those warriors were killed by the young man in black who got off the black ship, the leader of the ear mouse race spoke up. Apart from the Pear Hill, only the ear mouse race knew the chaotic source world as clearly. They always had their own special channels of obtaining information. Black ship. Is Shira still in the icy snow province? I will look for her and try to negotiate. Since our members have perished, what's the use of negotiating? When that brat comes out, I'll tear him to pieces. The leader of the separate abyss race uttered curses with his eyes wide open in rage. He wanted to crush the evil god to dust. Suddenly, a voice resounded. The more people that perish, the more benefits the survivors gain. You can only hope that the rest of your races can survive and even reach the chaotic source realm. Fuxie's figure appeared once again in the middle of the open space. Human sovereign, what do you mean? The old man of the bearing race asked. Adonis, death pained them. While the members of the ear mouse race knew that he had fallen to death by Zen's hands, they wanted to side with Zen and put all the blame on the evil god. You can ask Yellow Thirk about it when you go back, Fuxie replied plainly. It should be the last time the chaotic source world opens. The various alliances in the source world were growing increasingly clear in the chaotic condition. Even the civilizations on the other shore were itching for some action. After the chaos ancient gods had brewed for billions of years, they understood their positions. The spokespersons had already been well prepared for the fierce battle to come. Chapter 2987, The Arrays for Shielding. Hearing Fuxie's words, the leaders of the large races let out gasps and sighs. They were taken aback by the horrific news. These people, despite being the backbone of their races, were not spokespersons. And although they were aware of the situation in the source world, they had no idea it would come so soon. Didn't they still have at least 10 years left? To their utmost disgrace, the shade stones fell faster and faster from the hourglass. Elizabeth and the others had already looked into it, and they thought they still had at least 10 years left. It had slipped their minds that some things could accelerate without warning. Once things hit a critical point, they would erupt. That was exactly what had happened on the other shore. Still, Elizabeth and the rest were puzzled. Before they set out, Emperor Charm of the Sun Crow race and the Yellow Thirk of the Bearing race had not yet returned from the other shore. They had no clue what took place in the upper stages. However, Fuxie was under no obligation to make their doubts disappear. After all, many races still stood tall on the opposite side of the Pear Hill. Instead, he just ignored them and vanished before everyone's eyes. In the same moment, one of the leaders pointed at the center of the array. Some people have entered the core area. They come from the Pear Hill. At the center of the ring-like mountain range was a wide, open area that was perfect for large gatherings. In addition to the main peak in the middle, there were 100 circular arrays resting there. If a person wanted to refine their chaotic source spirits, they would have to enter a circular array. These were arranged by the powerhouses of the Nine Li race, with the help of other super forces. Luckily, the arrays were safe and could protect anyone who stayed inside them. In the past, after obtaining enough chaotic source spirits, creatures would rush towards the arrays. This would allow them to reach the chaotic source realm. However, entering an array was not as easy as it seemed. Many strong warriors failed to obtain enough chaotic source spirits, so they had to be creative to gain more. Often, warriors would wait around the arrays and attack incoming warriors. This meant that many battles would happen before anyone successfully arrived at an array. Some races even came together to guard the arrays. Although this was discouraged, this tactic did not break any rules. Compared to everyone else, the Pear Hill was the most prepared. They were able to enter the chaotic source world first, but to their disgrace, they reaped little. For some reason, they found nothing after exploring most of the western peak. Because of this, they moved down heading for the main peak itself. Yan was walking before everyone else, leading the group. Before she entered the main peak, she looked around the ring-like mountain range, a little disappointed with the results. Yan, why are you hesitating? A woman asked her. Shouldn't we go ahead? This woman had her hair pinned up in a bun with more than a dozen golden hairpins. They were interesting because, if you looked closely, these hairpins were her other shore token. Generally, a lot of divine crystals were consumed when the other shore tokens descended, but these golden hairpins were always on her head. The woman's name was Natalie. She was one of the best human warriors in the Pear Hill, and became Yan's first friend in the Pear Hill. At this point, the two were like sisters. All of the 9 caves and 18 veins at the main peak are quite dangerous. Even though we have been well prepared, obtaining chaotic source spirits won't be simple. My brother Zen. Yan trailed away, pursing her lips as a wave of anxiety washed over her. After entering the chaotic source world, Yan tried her best to find Zen. But the hurricanes got in the way of any progress, and the chaotic source world was too vast to be explored from end to end. Zen was nowhere to be found. If Yan had known earlier that this would happen, she would have left a soul mark on Zen before entering. She was too confident at the time, and now, she was regretful of her decision. Yan, you always say your brother is an invincible warrior, Natalie said. Why are you worried about him now? She gave Yan a reassuring smile and a friendly pat on the back. This was true, Yan often mentioned brilliant things about Zen to Natalie. In her eyes, Zen was all-powerful, even though Natalie didn't agree with her 100%. There were just too many talents in the world for Zen to be considered the best. In the snake goddess race alone, there were countless talents that couldn't be compared to one another. Zen, on the other hand, was from an unknown, unrecognized place. Sure, he might be the strongest from where he came from, but in the source world, he was close to nothing. At the entrance of the chaotic source world, Zen even had a quarrel with Elizabeth. Natalie saw this as unnecessary, and frankly, a little cocky. This did not mean his strength was strong, and after all, he had the help and support of Athamar and Winchell, well-known masters of the Oneness Sky Palace. What confused Natalie was that Fuxi had come forward to protect Zen, saying that Zen was his opponent. What puzzled her even more was that the soul-devouring demon from the black ship was born in Zen's inner world. Oddly enough, though the demon was born within him, he never listened to his orders. This led Natalie to wonder more and more about the mysterious Zen. I'm afraid something bad would happen to him, Yan expressed, shaking her head in disapproval. Your brother is powerful, Yan. He can protect himself, responded Natalie. And besides, he's not the only one who will enter the main peak. We all have to do so. Don't think too much. Although there were 9 paths and 18 diversions in the main peak, there were many competitors aiming for the chaotic source spirits. But because they were the first group at the entrance, they had the upper hand compared to the rest. Waiting might as well be a waste of time. They'd miss a great opportunity if they stalled for too long. Sounds reasonable. Yan nodded and stepped forward, leading all the creatures from the pear hill into the main peak. Not long after they entered, the sky began to rumble and darken. It was a hurricane again. It surged in the chaotic source world and seemed to be even stronger at the core. After the hurricane stopped, several more teams appeared. They were from the Bearing race, the Sun Crow race, and the Divine Farmer race. The one who led them all had silver hair, and carried a long, mighty spear. It was no other than the most outstanding talent of the Bearing race, Qartulad. The large group made it through the plain without any delay. They found a cave at the foot of the main peak and entered. Meanwhile, Zen's group had failed their exploration at the eastern peak. Because of this, they moved down from the top of the eastern peak along with the ear mice. Altogether, they passed through the plain and headed for the main peak. When they passed through the circular arrays along the plain, Zen paused and turned towards the ear mice. He asked, are these large arrays used to refine chaotic source spirits? Yes, they have the ability to refine chaotic source spirits, and do very well as temporary shields, an ear mouse responded. Once a cultivator entered an array, they'd be safe from outside forces. However, each array had a limited capacity to hold only 10 odd cultivators at a time. Zen, maybe you should just refine the chaotic source spirits here, Sally suggested, her eyes lighting up at what the ear mouse had said. The chaotic source spirits they obtained from the cave was enough for one person to reach the chaotic source realm. Sally was more than willing to give her chaotic source spirits to Zen. Sally was thinking that if Zen could reach the chaotic source realm, his strength would have improved 100-fold. Afterwards, he wouldn't be afraid of the young man in black anymore. It's a good idea, said Hyam. But if Zen reaches the chaotic source realm, he will be sent out of the chaotic source world for good. He had a deep intensity in his eyes. Are you sure you want Zen to leave? Chapter 2988, Stalagmites. These arrays worked in 3 different ways. Aside from helping refine the chaotic source spirits, they could protect weaker creatures as well. Moreover, they also functioned as transmission arrays. The warriors at the chaotic source realm were much stronger than those who were not able to reach this realm. Those who were able to finish the chaotic source reinforcement and had reached the chaotic source realm would be directly sent outside. This was done to prevent them from killing others. Darth already knew that Zen had gathered enough chaotic source spirits. However, it chose not to say anything about it. It was perfectly clear that Zen's departure would be completely up to him. No way, Zen said as he shook his head. Zen was the core of the group. He was the glue holding these people together. If he chose to leave, Hyam would have to lead the group to explore the main peak. That would be too risky. He couldn't just let them continue on their own. Elvinia and Dorothy exchanged looks. They understood what this meant. They knew Zen well enough that there was no way he would just leave these people behind. Zen and the others continued on their journey and arrived at the foot of the main peak before the next round of hurricane came. Observed in the distance, the main peak was tall and slender. But actually, the mountain base was not that small. On the east side of it, there were two caves. One of them went upwards while the other one went downwards. When they arrived at the east side, Zen took a quick look at the two caves. Afterwards, he chose the one that went upwards. The ear mice had always been cautious, and Darth was no exception. Before they even set foot on the main peak, Darth had already ordered those rock mice to go inside it first and scout the area. Upon entering, they found that the cave was very narrow. However, it suddenly became wider after they walked for over 100 feet. The inner space was actually bigger than they had previously imagined. Some of them felt quite uneasy and nervous at this sudden change in terrain, so they released their spiritual senses to scan the cave. Nonetheless, they found no living energy inside the cave. It seemed like this place was desolated and uninhabited. It doesn't seem like there is any difference between the main peak and the eastern one, Hutton pointed out. He seemed dejected. He walked towards several rocks and began smashing them. In the end, however, he got nothing. The expression on the others' faces also darkened. If they couldn't find any chaotic source spirit on the main peak, where else would they be able to find one? They began to feel hopeless. Did they come for nothing this time? I think there's a difference. Actually, it's kind of strange, said the ear mouse Darth. Really, what's the difference? Zen asked. He was curious now. Those rock mice I have sent earlier to explore the cave have all been wiped out, Darth replied while pointing towards the depths of the cave. Did the chaotic source spirits devour them? Hyam asked as he peered towards the direction Darth had pointed to them. Is it possible that another race had entered the main peak ahead of us and killed those rock mice? Elvenia couldn't help but raise a question as well. Their main concern now was whether there were chaotic source spirits present here or not. I'm not really sure what happened, Darth replied while shaking its head. There is a very strange force inside. When the rock mice stepped within that power range, they stopped following my orders. Because of that, I don't know what they found. Well, there's only one way to find out. Let's go up there and see it for ourselves, Zen suggested. The rock mice had poor combat skills. It was understandable that they could have been devoured by some strong chaotic source spirits. Zen took the lead while the rest of the group walked slowly and followed closely behind him. After walking for about a few miles, Darth mentioned to Zen, the rock mice disappeared somewhere around this area. Please be careful, Master Zen. Zen stopped for a while and looked around. He saw several sharp stalagmites in front of him. These stalagmites were densely arranged together, seemingly like the fangs of a frightful monster. As he narrowed his eyes, Zen slightly levitated and clung to one of the sharp stalagmites. He gently touched the stalagmite with his palm and pushed it a little. With a muffled sound, the stalagmite turned to dust. Nothing found. Zen shook his head and touched another sharp stalagmite. Just like the other one, the stalagmite turned into a pile of powder. He didn't find any chaotic source spirit inside. Zen and the others were thoroughly disappointed. On the other hand, they were now able to relax after confirming that no chaotic source spirit could be found here. They copied what Zen did and started beating the sharp stalagmites. Also, they weren't able to find anything. This is so peculiar. If there's nothing here, why did the rock mice disappear? I don't understand what happened. Darth exclaimed gloomily. There was something really weird going on inside this cave. But because they gained nothing in this area, they had no other choice but to explore deeper. Once again, they followed Zen and went deeper inside as they went around the sharp stalagmites. After they walked for quite some distance, they suddenly heard a rumbling sound. It came from behind them. With anxiety mounting inside them, they all looked back towards the sound. A bunch of sharp stalagmites had actually regrown in the place of the stalagmites they had just broken. Moreover, these stalagmites continued to grow and crisscrossed against each other. These had now completely blocked any way of retreat. It was as if a monster had closed its jaws. The stones are able to grow on their own. What on earth is going on? Let me take a closer look. Seeing what just happened behind him, Hutton intended to go back and figure out what had caused this. But as soon as he took a step back, several fist-sized sharp stalagmites popped out from every direction and wildly grew towards the center of the cave. Witnessing this, Zen's eyebrows raised in surprise. With a slight flick of his hand, he cast a ray of sword radiance towards the growing stalagmites. Cling! Even though Zen's attack directly hit the stalagmites, they still remained intact. The others saw this and stared dumbfounded. Their eyes were wide in shock. Hutton, come back here. Quickly, everybody listen to me, run straight forward. Zen bellowed. Realizing they were in trouble, Zen pulled the air above Hutton's head without a second thought. Hutton was pulled back from about 100 feet away. Everybody started to run forward. If it was just an ordinary rock, it wouldn't matter how sharp it was because they could smash it easily without getting hurt. However, it would be a different story if these stalagmites contained chaotic source spirits. Zen and others wouldn't be able to destroy these stalagmites quickly enough. If these sharp stalagmites caught up with them, they would end up getting impaled and eventually killed by them. Whoosh, 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 dense rock spikes began to grow all over the surfaces of the cave. They covered the entire ground. Zen and others had to fly as swiftly as they could because there was not a patch of ground in which they could stand anymore. The cave ahead is narrow. Watch out, Hyam reminded the others. Over 10 sharp stalagmites half a foot in length had already grown out. It wouldn't be long before they completely covered the cave from ceiling to ground. They had to rush over before the stalagmites closed the entire cave up. Whoosh, Elvinia, Hyam, and Dorothy were the first ones to pass through them. They were followed by Zen, Darth and others. Meanwhile, Sally, Hutton, and Umar moved a bit slower. Naturally, they fell behind. As Zen reached the narrow area, he frowned as he saw the others were still running behind. He smashed the sharp stalagmites with his hands and feet. He unleashed a massive force that actually blocked their further extension. Hurry up, I can't hold on for much longer. The stalagmites sprang out from the stone walls and emitted a tremendous force. Zen could only delay their extensions for a short while. Whoosh, swoosh, Sally and Hutton had now passed under Zen's arms and looked back simultaneously. Umar, hurry up. Umar was the farthest one behind. He gritted his teeth and it seemed like he activated some kind of secret method. He turned into a sharp golden sword and passed right under Zen's armpit. However, his body had been cut by the tip of a stalagmite and blood flowed out of the wound. Right after Umar reached them, Zen couldn't hold on any further. He released his hands and went through the narrow area as well. The place he had been holding on to had now been filled with stalagmites, which blocked the way of the remaining 5-ear mice. Chapter 2989, Rock Giants. The intersecting stalagmites pressed heavily from all directions. The 5-ear mice squeaked as the passageway closed. One of the ear mice took out its other shore token, an iron house. Everyone, get in the house. Hurry up, take cover. Such tokens of descending type were rare and unpopular on the other shore. This token could be used to imprison opponents. It could also be used as a defensive shield due to its durability. Without hesitation, the other 4 ear mice sought refuge. Crack, crack, crack. The stalagmites extended rapidly until they were pushing at the surface of the iron house. Clank, clank, clank. Under the great pressure, the iron house made a grating sound. The iron house can resist 3,000 divine megatons of force. The stalagmites are heavy, but they are not enough to break it. Don't worry, the first ear mouse said. Squeak, 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 squeak. The other 4 ear mice echoed. In terms of cultivation methods and theurgies, the ear mice were weaker than the other super forces, but their other shore tokens had always been the strongest. But the relief didn't last long. After a few seconds, the foundations of the iron house couldn't bear the load any longer. It was crushed by the great force. Bang! The 5 ear mice in the iron house were crushed into minced meat in the blink of an eye. The stalagmites in the cave continued to grow rapidly. Even though the group had passed through the narrow place, they still couldn't afford to stop running. Speed up, you can't resist these stalagmites, Zen reminded. Zen had tried to prevent the growth of those stalagmites, but even he couldn't restrain the power contained within them. Whoosh, 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 they all silently rushed onward. The stalagmites grew faster and faster. From time to time, some even shot out from the flanks. Any carelessness would cause death. Through this, the advantage of the ear mice was revealed. They were small and flexible. Even if a stalagmite suddenly shot down from above, they could easily dodge it. Sally had never experienced such danger. Her round eyes wide open, she kept flying up and down. Suddenly, a stalagmite shot down from above. It was as sharp as a sword, and it was indestructible. Anyone hit by it would feel like they were being stabbed with thousands of divine megatons of force, except excruciatingly slower. The stalagmite shot out toward Sally's head. Look out! Hyam, who was flying on the right, knocked Sally aside, pushing her a few feet away. Just like Zen, Hyam paid attention to everyone while flying, but he cared about Sally the most. Crack! The stalagmite missed Sally, but it pierced Hyam's right shoulder. He had tried to avoid it but failed. His muscles cut by the stalagmite, he bled profusely. Hyam, you! Sally was shocked to see Hyam's large wound. Don't space out. Keep running, Hyam shouted in a loud voice. The stalagmites in the cave grew more and more quickly. There was no time to waste. After tens of thousands of feet, the stalagmites finally stopped shooting out. Everyone had passed through in peace. Hutton and the others gasped for air. Sally cleaned the wound on Hyam's shoulder. Darth and the other ear mice looked back with lingering fear. The passageway they had come through was now crammed with stalagmites. Zen looked back at the stalagmites and walked toward them. Zen, what are you doing? Dorothy asked. I want to check them out. They are too strange, Zen replied. No less than 1,000,000 stalagmites had grown along the way. If each of them needed a chaotic source spirit to support it, then there must be over 1,000,000 chaotic source spirits. But this was obviously impossible. Zen approached the stalagmites. He lightly touched one of them, poking a hole right through it. Sure enough, Zen muttered. The stalagmites have become fragile, said Darth, agape. Yes, Zen nodded as he raised his head to look at the cave ceiling. The chaotic source spirits came all the way with us. They stayed in the stalagmites and used them to attack us. They must have kept moving ahead of us to merge with new stalagmites, abandoning the ones we've already passed, Darth remarked. The chaotic source spirits moved fast through these rocks. Zen didn't care about this. He narrowed his eyes. So why have they given up now? What do you mean? Darth was puzzled by Zen's words. Zen turned to look at the deep passage ahead. If there is an end to the cave, the chaotic source spirits just need to wait there to make sure we can't break through quickly. Then the other chaotic source spirits can use the stalagmites to assassinate us. Since we can't use the grand teleportation, we would surely die. After Zen finished his words, a chill went through his companions. No one would be able to escape such a maneuver, if true. Master Zen, don't give them ideas. The chaotic source spirits are intelligent and they can understand human language, said Darth anxiously. Zen smiled calmly. Precisely because they are intelligent, they must have already thought of this. The only reason why they didn't push through it is they have other ways to deal with us, and they are confident that they can capture us. With these words, Zen pointed forward. Rocks in the distance started to move. They separated from the walls and turned into rock giants. An ordinary rock giant wouldn't have been a threat, but those possessed by the chaotic source spirits were indestructible. Dong, 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 huge rock giants emerged from all directions and charged toward the group. Seeing this, Dorothy, Elvinia, Hyam, and the ear mice scrambled to take out their other shore tokens. A flower spun above Dorothy and took her shape. This was the unique twin blossoms. The two Dorothys, hearts connected, both carried a sword. The power of Dorothy's origin swordsmanship would thus be twice as strong. The warrior of the stone hill floated in the air beside Elvinia, with a sword in one hand and 1,000 swords in the other. Hyam also deployed his other shore token. Strong warriors like them were not afraid of fighting head-on. What they feared most were ambush attacks in the dark. But now that the chaotic source spirits had decided to confront them face to face, they would definitely fight to the end. Chapter 2990, Huge Eye. Even though the ground shook as a rock giant rushed quickly towards Zen, he still remained composed and nonchalant. The rock giant balled its huge fists and then smashed them towards Zen, but he disappeared in a flash from the spot. The next moment, he reappeared behind the rock giant. With a crisp sound, he slashed his sword across the giant's body, but it failed to damage even the surface of the rock. Still, Zen wasn't disappointed. In fact, he was surprised. It just proved that there really was a chaotic source spirit that hid inside the rock giant and strengthened its body. Of course, he did not forget that their trip's main objective was to obtain the chaotic source spirits. Clang! There was a deafening crash when the rock giant stretched its arms and fell on its back. The way it moved wasn't particularly slow, but it still couldn't touch Zen at all. Meanwhile, Zen moved as swiftly as a light feather that glided in the wind, that even a small force could blow him away, but not damage him. He ducked to avoid the rock giant's attack, then squinted his right eye which flashed a white beam of light. Authentic visual world. As he employed the skill, the whole world became unusually clear in his vision. It didn't take him much effort to find several cracks on the surface of the rock giant. Sword texture technique. Break it. Next, he raised his sword and pointed it at the junction of two cracks found on the giant's waist. The queen ant he had fought before had absorbed many chaotic source spirits over a long period of time, so its body had only one flaw. On the other hand, the rock giant had many flaws since it was only a temporary product. The next events all went by in a blur. As soon as Zen's sword touched the rock giant's weak spot, its body exploded into smithereens. Yet, Zen didn't lower his guard even when the rock giant was now crushed into pieces. That was because he suspected that the chaotic source spirits must have been plotting something because they gathered in the main peak. Since they hadn't assassinated him with the stalagmites, he expected them to use more powerful means against him. The rock giants, however, were much weaker than he had imagined. The thought quickly flashed in his mind, but no matter what the truth was, he believed that they must be able to obtain some chaotic source spirits from the rock giants. Just as the stone fragments collapsed on the ground, a small red creature emerged out of them. Compared to the ordinary chaotic source spirits that Zen had seen before, this one was in a strange red color, and its big eyes were filled with ferocity instead of the loveliness the other chaotic source spirits possessed. "There's only one chaotic source spirit," he muttered. His eyes suddenly lit up in realization. Still, he stretched out his hand and an invisible force enveloped the little creature. To his surprise, the little creature moved unimaginably fast. It directly plunged into the ground in an attempt to escape. But Zen wouldn't allow his prey to escape before him. At that moment, the force he had just released turned into an invisible giant claw and grasped at the ground. The chaotic source spirit was extremely exhausted. Even if it merged with the rocks again, it wouldn't be able to make them solid to resist Zen. The rocks were as fragile as bean curd under the pressure of the invisible giant claw. With just a slight effort, the giant claw lifted them off the ground together with the chaotic source spirit that hid inside them. At that moment, the rocks suddenly exploded in the air. The chaotic source spirit immediately escaped and went straight towards Zen. It came to an abrupt halt as its little red body swelled rapidly and shattered into pieces. Zen couldn't believe it. Trapped in a desperate situation, it decided to blow itself up. Fortunately, the blast wasn't enough to cause any damage to him. He just covered his face with his hand and easily blocked the suicide attack. After the slight explosion, he heard a small clank by his feet. It turned out to be an amber crystal that fell on the ground. Zen picked it up as he glanced across the surrounding battlefield. Generally speaking, the rock giants weren't considered as formidable enemies. Elvenia, Dorothy, Hutton, Sally, Hyam, and the ear mice had each fought against a rock giant. Although their own battles didn't end as fast as Zen's, the chaotic source spirits inside the rock giants they faced were quickly worn out. Eventually, the rock giants became very weak. A loud thud resounded throughout the area as the iridescent stone had pierced one of the rock giants. The red chaotic source spirit inside the rocks was forced out of them. As Sally gently flicked her fingers, the iridescent stone went back and hit the chaotic source spirit, thus reducing it into pieces. Only an amber crystal remained, which dropped to the ground. "Perfect," Sally exclaimed with a satisfied smile. She kicked the debris and dirt off her feet and happily picked up the amber crystal from the ground. Although it was only one chaotic source spirit, it was a reward she had reaped with her own strength. Following her victory, several more loud bangs echoed in the field. The other rock giants were defeated one by one, and each of them had obtained a chaotic source spirit. Once they had cleared the battlefield and gathered together, Hyam looked as if something bothered him. "I don't see the point of those strange chaotic source spirits," he said. It was known that the chaotic source spirits needed to merge with each other to become powerful. For instance, 100 chaotic source spirits that had fused together was as powerful as one chaotic source realm warrior. Thus, 1,000 or even 10,000 of them merged together would have an incomparable amount of strength. Today, however, they oddly chose to fight alone, which was like a free gift for Zen and his group of warriors. "There must be something wrong with them," Zen remarked. "I have a strange feeling that something has been staring at me in the darkness in this weird place," he added with a frown. Darth unexpectedly nodded and said, "Yes. In fact, we noticed it as soon as we got here, but we had no way to confirm our assumption." "Exactly," the other ear mice chimed in as well. One aspect of the ear mice's abilities was far stronger than that of humans, and that was their keen perception. If Zen had noticed the strangeness, then the ear mice had surely managed to do so as well. As a matter of fact, Zen and his companions weren't the only ones who had encountered such weird matters. A cool, gentle breeze swept through another passageway. Yan's dress rustled elegantly against the floor as she pressed her fingers on her forehead. She gazed at several rock giants in front of her and said in a low voice, "Break." The ground trembled and an audible crash was heard when the rock giants fell apart before her. "Freeze." Yan opened her mouth once again, and an invisible power instantly restrained the chaotic source spirits inside the rock giants. When the little creatures were exposed, they just stared at her with hatred before they detonated themselves. Several explosions later, all of them had turned into shreds. There was a trace of pity and sadness in Yan's eyes as she looked at them, even though she didn't directly kill them. She had already had a thorough understanding of these miserable creatures. All warriors in the other shore realm needed to capture the chaotic source spirits in order to obtain greater power. Although she could choose not to kill these creatures straight, they would still die at some point after the crystals had been taken out of their bodies. A moment of mercy wouldn't change the inevitable. The chaotic source spirits had a life that entailed the constant tragedy of being nurtured and slaughtered. Perhaps no other creatures could have a more miserable fate than them. That was why the sight of hostility in their eyes made Yan uncomfortable and guilty. In any case, that same form of slaughter had been taking place in the other passages as well. The warriors had all reaped their first harvest in the main peak, but a dozen chaotic source spirits were far from enough for them. Meanwhile, a huge eye that resided in the main peak had been observing everything that had happened below it through the thick layers of rocks. This huge eye was 10 feet wide. Half of it flashed with a white light, and the other half with a red light. It obviously didn't belong to the chaotic source world, because it was another shore token. Chapter 2991, The Eligible Targets. It had been a while since the huge eye was silently observing the events below it, to embed every living creature in the main peak to its vision. A huge ball rested under this eye, which was actually a big and powerful chaotic source spirit. It measured more than 100 feet in size, different from an ordinary one of its kind. This large ball was clearly the mother of all the chaotic source spirits. The voice of the mother of chaotic source spirits broke the silence in the air. Have you found the eligible targets? The huge eye flashed and sent out a part of its consciousness in response. The eye had no organs to speak, so it could only send messages through its consciousness. I have many qualified targets in mind now, said the huge eye. Let me see, the mother demanded. Red and white lights inside the huge eye descended in front of the mother and drew a graceful figure. It was Yan, who wore a long dress. The light figure showed that she was climbing up the cave, leading the members of the snake goddess race. This is a human girl who cultivates the truth of holy words. She has the blood of the snake goddess, the huge eye explained. The mother nodded, then started to count. 1. Buzz. The red and white lights flashed again and revealed another figure. This time, it was a white-haired young man. It was none other than Qartulad from the Bearing race. A man of the Bearing race, who cultivates the truth of 5 orientations, owns the 5 orientation body, and is one of the inheritors of the yellow Theurk. 2, the mother said with a blank expression. Buzz. The lights flashed some more and showed the top masters of the minor races, and the huge eye had been targeting all of them. There are 11 in total. What about the targets for yourself? Asked the mother. The eye smiled. Me, well, I am interested in this guy. Buzz. The huge eye flashed and Zen's figure appeared, which was outlined by red and white lights. Is he also one of the human race? Why did you choose him? The mother asked and looked at Zen in curiosity. This man is very interesting. He has merged with something of my kind, said the giant eye with its consciousness. The mother was visibly shocked at this news. You mean he has merged with an eye of will? Yes, if I'm not mistaken, he must have assimilated an eye of will when he was in the sacred Mallow temple. The huge eye answered affirmatively. The mother of the chaotic source spirits, however, was not interested in the giant eye's chosen target. Instead she asked, are you sure that we can escape safely after we possess their bodies? There are supreme masters who stay outside the chaotic source world. I can sense them, the mother said anxiously. HMPH, it's just human sovereign who's on guard outside. I'm afraid he can't keep us here if he is alone. It seemed that there was a hint of contempt in the huge eye's words. That's good, the mother hissed. She turned to look at the phantoms of the eligible targets, and the hatred in her only grew even more. We chaotic source spirits have been kept in this place, while they slaughter and trample us at will. Now, it's time for them to pay the price and have a taste of this kind of life. You mongrels want to absorb us. Let's see if you are qualified first. Normally, creatures of the other shore could not enter the source world. Yet, the chaotic source spirit itself was quite special. After the snake goddess had discovered it, their pack had been nurtured carefully and grew to a great number. Over the years, the chaotic source spirits had helped nurture countless masters in the source world. Despite such a deed, life in the source world was cruel for them. Their true bodies were locked in the powerful chaotic source sea on stage 22. They couldn't even move in the slightest, but as a kind of other shore token, they descended in the chaotic source world. If it hadn't been for the accident a few years ago, then chaotic source spirits would have been enslaved and kept in captivity for more generations. During that time, one powerful master had killed the guardian of the chaotic source sea and freed all the chaotic source spirits. The mother was the core of the chaotic source spirits. She wanted to bring all the chaotic source spirits back to the other shore and stop them from being the other shore tokens for good. She wanted to end their miserable lives. However, the master who had saved them refused the mother's request and asked the chaotic source spirits to maintain what they had been doing. The mother was confused, until a huge eye, the dreaded eye demon, appeared. To descend in the source world, creatures of the other shore required some warriors to support them, or in other words, they needed a complete inner world for support. Thus, the mother was very curious as to how the dreaded eye demon had broken through the other shore's restrictions and arrived at where they were now. In addition, the dreaded eye demon brought a task for them when it came, to devour the top talents in the source world. Needless to say, the chaotic source spirits were very excited when they heard the news. Those creatures had devoured them for so long, and finally there was a day that they could devour them back. It was what the chaotic source spirits had been dreaming of doing, but they couldn't do so, until the huge eye had arrived. The chaotic source spirits didn't have the ability to bite back, but the giant eye could. It turned out that the master who had freed them had already found the escape route in advance. It was usually the mother's strategy to spread the plenty of chaotic source spirits across the 4 peaks in the north, east, west, and south, in order to protect as many of them as possible. As for those warriors who entered the main peak without permission, the mother would lead all the other chaotic source spirits to fight back. This time, however, was different. Now, the mother took all the chaotic source spirits back to the main peak so they could attract those talents to their location. The tests in the caves and passageways were nothing more than observation methods to select the best talents. At this point, the giant eye had already chosen the targets suitable for their consumption. Below the huge eye's hideaway, creatures of various races had entered the main peak one after another. All of them encountered the same situations as Zen and the others had. It was relatively late when the evil god had entered the main peak. It was known that the members of the separate abyss race were incomparable to those of the ordinary forces. 4 members of their race had very special other shore tokens. Those 4 relied on each other and formed a perfect circle. They were so strong that the strength they showed through the circle was enough to kill the masters at the chaotic source realm. The evil god fought against them, and although he tried his best, he had only seriously injured one of them. In the end, he had to retreat. It was the first time that the evil god couldn't defeat warriors who were at the same level as him. Still, the evil god didn't care about it at all. After all, he had already killed a large number of people in the chaotic source world and obtained so much. What he only had to do now was to reach the chaotic source realm. Meanwhile, there were rock giants that blocked Zen and his group's path along their journey. The rock giants didn't hinder Zen and his companions, but the warriors didn't get many chaotic source spirits from them, either. They had soon climbed a distance of 20,000 feet up the cave, but only got a little more than 90 chaotic source spirits. It was not enough for any of them when the gain was to be shared. Yet, Zen wasn't discouraged at all. The remaining hundreds of thousands of chaotic source spirits must be hiding somewhere on the main peak, waiting for them to harvest. After they climbed more than 30,000 feet, they were almost in the middle of the main peak. The chaotic source spirits seemed to have hollowed out the center of the main peak, as there was a huge hole formed in the middle. As soon as they stepped into the huge cave, they all stopped walking. There were all kinds of patterns that were engraved on the cave's walls, which made Zen and his companions feel as if they were in a huge palace. Look at them. What do the patterns stand for? Sally looked around, her eyes blinking in curiosity. I've seen these patterns before, said Hyam. He continued, when I was in the first stage of the other shore realm. They are the sculptures in the sacred Mallow temple. Dorothy glanced at Zen and nodded. Me and Zen explored that temple together. I'm sure of it. Chapter 2992, Sculptures. As Zen paced around the cave, he walked towards a corner and observed the sculptures on the walls. The sculptures varied in forms, figures, and creatures. From cattle, to snakes, to birds. The sculptures were unique in their own ways. Sadly, none of the sculptures was the dreaded eye demon. Zen knew what he was looking for, especially since the dreaded eye demon was hard to miss as it was only an eyeball. Zen had prior knowledge to them when he integrated with the Eye of Will. These sculptures are exactly the same as those in the sacred Mallow temple, Zen pointed out, nodding his head in approval. The members and disciples of powerful forces never settled at the stage 1 for long. As for Zen, he only entered the temple because some humans had invited him. Hyam was also an exception to this. He had just entered the other shore, and grew curious about the place. Once, he entered the sacred Mallow Temple, too. But why are all these sculptures here? Dorothy asked, curious to know more. She had been through a lot in the past. The first time she entered the sacred Mallow Temple, she had struggled and was nearly killed inside. The risky thing in the sacred Mallow Temple was the soul-purifying light, which could kill all the souls of light, Zen comforted her. Good thing we don't have that here. He paused and looked back at Dorothy. What I don't understand is how the chaotic source spirits have something to do with the dreaded eye demons. This bothered Zen, especially because these were two completely different races. Because he didn't have enough information, he couldn't understand. More so for the others, who had no clue about anything. The group had made it to the end of the cave. Though there were 8 other pathways around the cave, they only motioned downwards. It meant that these passages were probably connected to the other 8 entrances at the bottom of the main peak. The chaotic source spirits must be hiding up here. Elvinia nudged above. I'm sure that we'll find our way out if we break the cave ceiling. The chaotic source spirits had the ability to cut the rocks and moved in and out as they pleased. If it wasn't difficult for spirits, it should be possible for the group to do the same. As Zen, Hyam and the others thought of more plans, another group of people came through another passage. They were from the Bearing race and the Sun Crow race. When they met eyes with Zen and his companions, their eyes widened in surprise. The silver-haired young man in the lead, Qartulad, was carrying a long spear on his shoulder. He squinted in arrogance. Interesting, muttered Qartulad. It saddened me that I didn't come across you guys earlier. I didn't expect to see you here at all. Qartulad smiled, but his kindness remained questionable. Just then, he lightly tapped on the spear, and it suddenly shook while a wisp of white light wrapped itself around the weapon. Just as Qartulad was about to make a move, another group of people appeared from another passage. They were from the New Moon race and the Divine Farmer race, and they didn't seem to be pleased either. The man called Mount, from the Divine Farmer race, stood at the forefront of the group. On his shoulder was a little girl named Maya, who had long, curly hair and a snarky expression. When the two saw Zen and Elvinia, they smiled at each other in eagerness. Uncle Mount, are you going to fight with them right now? What a coincidence. The two people on the first row, right here, at the same time. Maya said this in hushed tones, keeping her expression hidden behind her curly locks of hair. Mount narrowed his eyes and gave Zen and Elvinia a good look. Aside from fusing with chaotic source spirits, he planned to get rid of these two as well. If they had obtained enough chaotic source spirits, they would have already attacked Zen. However, they were on the lookout for the chaotic source spirits that had disappeared. They couldn't afford a delay. Also, hosting a battle in a cave was not the best course of action right now. Mount was a steady and prudent person. He wouldn't challenge someone without full preparation. Let's wait a while, Mount decided. Our main goal is still to retrieve the chaotic source spirits. We can't go back empty-handed. They can live a little longer, he chuckled, drawing away from Zen and the rest. He looked around, scanning the cave, when the strange sculptures caught his sight. Qartulad suddenly spoke up. The chaotic source spirits are surely important, but killing the good-for-nothings from the Oneness Sky Palace is proper business. If you don't want to take action against them, I'll take matters into my own hands. He was not as scrupulous nor as patient as Mount. Eagerness flashed in his eyes as his spear vibrated on his shoulder. Hearing this, Elvinia, Dorothy, Hyam, and the rest of their group were distraught. They knew they were outnumbered and their opponents were strong, so they were at a disadvantage. Zen, being the leader of the group, took a step forward and calmly said, "In my opinion, generally speaking, most people who describe others as good-for-nothings are just cowards. If you want to prove yourself so bad, you can do better than just spitting nonsense." He let out a laugh. Qartulad, on the other hand, was not impressed with Zen at all. To Qartulad, Mount, Maya, the only person they should be cautious with was the young man in black. Zen and Elvinia were nothing but prey to them. In any case, they already ruled out the disciples of the Oneness Sky Palace because they seemed too weak. They thought they would just endure all kinds of sarcasms without talking back. However, they were surprised to see Zen speak up so confidently. Qartulad chuckled and said, "I'm really surprised. After so many years, the Oneness Sky Palace finally has a member with balls." He gestured towards Zen. "Since it seems like you're eager to die, don't mind me being rude." After he said that, he gently pulled out the white, magnificent spear from his shoulder. As the tip of the weapon swept the ground, the rocks beneath it were sliced right at the middle. This spear's sharpness was no laughing matter. "You, rude." Zen raised his eyebrows, questioning this arrogant man before him. As he said so, the tip of the snow sword slowly stretched out from his space ring. He took hold of it and pointed it towards the members of the Bearing race and the Sun Crow race. Pleased with their reactions, he said, "This has nothing to do with manners." He looked at everyone in the eye, and then gave a wink at Khalid. "It's just, well, none of you can leave here alive." As soon as he finished speaking, the diamond-shaped civilization artifact in his inner world began to move. Once it was completely unraveled, it resembled a spiky ball. To add, the unique aura of regal jade civilization gave out in full bloom, which added to the artifact's extraordinary impression. "You arrogant mongrel, you just want to die. We won't hesitate to kill you." The members of all four races, the Bearing race and the Sun Crow race included, roared in anger. In an instant, Khalid, Mount, Maya were smiling no longer. They realized that they had just underestimated Zen. After all, the young man in black who they had feared the most, was a creation of Zen's inner world. But these people weren't going to back down now. They had been through hell and back, so they had no reason to retreat now. Besides, they still outnumbered Zen and his companions by a large number, so they still stood with great leverage. Phew, the tension in the atmosphere thickened as a battle was just around the corner. But just as everyone took their battle stances, footsteps echoed throughout the cave. One more group came through another passage. Brother. The group that emerged was the Snake Goddess race, led by Yan. They would have been the first to enter, but Yan spent too much time catching chaotic source spirits, making them the last to arrive. Seeing that Zen was safe and unharmed, Yan was more than delighted. She was relieved as she strode forward to give him a hug. The Pear Hill had the most members, so they had the advantage of calling the shots. Though they were hit by the hurricane, they could easily gather quickly and continue moving. Members of the Snake Goddess race and the Oneness Sky Palace gathered together, impressively outnumbering the Bearing race and the other three races altogether. Chapter 2993, Unexpected Attack. Acting on instinct, 6 women of the Snake Goddess race stationed themselves before Yan. They had their eyes fixated on the people of the Bearing race and the Divine Farmer race. The scales on the bodies of these women flickered with a pinch of dark gold light. Their radiant faces reflected hints of vigilance as if they were on guard against them. Their formation was not just a coincidence, but was intentional. Their positions formed the 6 snake shadows array of the Pear Hill. They were exactly the 6 snake shadows. The 6 snake shadows had made a name for themselves in the source world. The Pear Hill would handpick only the most exceptional talents from each generation of the Snake Goddess race and recruit them. They would then offer them rigorous training to become a part of the 6 snake shadows. Accompanying Yan, the 6 snake shadows were given 2 missions to carry out in the chaotic source world. They were to reach the chaotic source realm, and they had to protect Yan at all costs. Even though Yan's strength was on par with the geniuses from other super forces, they still didn't want to take any chances. For Pear Hill, Yan was an invaluable treasure. Yan turned back. Her face was robbed of all emotions, as she glared at those of the Bearing race and the Divine Farmer race with piercing eyes. "How dare you?" she asked Khalid. "Who are you to stop us? If it bothers you so much, why don't you join him too?" Khalid retorted while furrowing his brows. The sudden appearance of the warriors from Pear Hill forced the people of the Bearing race and the Divine Farmer race to stay on guard. Even with their empowering presence, it wasn't enough to make them retreat. However, the situation would now become extremely troublesome. Mount watched all this unravel from a distance and frowned. Normally he would not back away from a fight against the people from Pear Hill or the Oneness Sky Palace, but the situation demanded otherwise. Mount didn't agree with the timing and place of this issue. Moreover, he had a hunch that something was wrong with this place. The sculptures inside the cave gave off an eerie vibe. Furthermore, the location of the chaotic source spirits was still unknown. Even if they somehow defeated the enemy in time, there would always be a chance of someone taking advantage of their preoccupation and stealing the chaotic source spirits for themselves. Yan kept her unfaltering gaze at Khalid. Her lusciously long black hair fluttered in the air as a trace of red light enveloped her, responding to her rage. "This place isn't ideal for a fight. But, if you're asking for it, we won't hold back." As if to solidify her statement, the bodies of the 6 snake shadows began to glow with cyan color. The other shore power inside other people from the Snake Goddess race began to surge as they activated it. Khalid never expected such a little girl to hold that much authority over the others. Of course, he didn't want to act on impulse and run into a battle blindly without considering the aftereffects. During the intense exchange of provoking statements, Mount walked over to Khalid and placed his hands on his shoulder. "Our primary goal right now is to find those chaotic source spirits. This isn't the time to wage unnecessary battles." Khalid was a powerful warrior, thus pride came as second nature to him. He wouldn't just sit around and gulp down the bitter juice of defeat, especially not at the hands of these women of Pear Hill. If Yan continued with her threats, he would probably be provoked into fighting them head-on. Mount was familiar with Khalid's temperament. Fearing Khalid would act impulsively, he walked over to him to calm his nerves down. Khalid clenched his fists as he glared at Zen and Yan before he turned to leave. But, just as he turned back, his long spear suddenly moved. At the same time, a skull emerged out of nowhere in his hand. He clasped the white spear in his hand and charged in Zen and Yan's direction with determined eyes. Devil soul-sucking spear. As he chanted the words, a light with a mixture of black and gray shot out from the tip of the spear. Khalid's surprise attack shocked both the people of the Oneness Sky Palace and the Pear Hill. The energy surging from his move was unbelievably strong. The light seemed to hold a mysterious kind of power. Even the people of the Bearing race and Divine Farmer race were taken aback by it. Mount had mixed expressions on his face. He was annoyed that Khalid had shunned his advice, but he was also surprised at how fast he moved. Khalid's attack seemed simple, but he had been planning for this moment for a long time. Yan and Zen were the two most important figures of the Pear Hill and the Oneness Sky Palace, respectively. If they were killed, the others wouldn't pose as much of a challenge. His devil soul-sucking spear was formidable. It could one-shot any opponent. The light passed by like a flash. It bypassed many people, including the 6 snake shadows, and went towards its 2 targets, Yan and Zen. Before the 6 snake shadows even had the time to react, it had already reached Yan. Yan was strong, but she didn't expect this to happen at all. She had pinned Khalid to be a coward who could only throw empty threats and do nothing more. Just as he sensed the unique energy emanating from the light, Zen became serious. Fortunately, his civilization artifact was activated. As soon as he focused hard, an emerald-like feather emerged and floated in the space above him. Remaining quick on his feet, he grabbed Yan, turned around and ran with her to avoid the light. With a whoosh, the light brushed past Zen, making slight contact with his clothes. As a result, the fiber of the clothes on his back began to rot. The skin directly beneath the fabric turned a charred black color. Even though the light shot from the spear was free of poison, the spear itself was a manifestation of pure evil. The light contained a strong power capable of corrosion. Luckily, Zen's body was resilient against such energy. If he were an ordinary human being, he would not have survived. Go to perdition. I'll make you regret this when I'm through with you. Zen was fuming with rage. They had stepped over his last nerve that kept him sane. He had been wanting to teach the people from the Bearing race, the Divine Farmer race, the New Moon race and the Sun Crow race a lesson. But he shared the same thoughts as Mount. This was not the right place for a fight. However, he had planned to pay them back for the past with interest once they were outside. But now, the circumstances had changed. Khalid had declared war when he first aimed at Yan. Yan's safety was Zen's biggest concern. If anyone threatened it, Zen would make sure they didn't live to make the same mistake twice. Swoosh. All of a sudden, Zen dashed towards Khalid with agility. It was hard to keep track of his movements. It was as if he was a ghost. Seeing his assault had failed, Khalid realized he misjudged the limits of Zen's capabilities. The skill Zen had used to dodge his strike was beyond his comprehension. From his perspective, there was no one in the same level of the other shore realm in the source world who could have survived that attack. He had been so sure that he wouldn't miss his target. However, with a single twist of his body, Zen had made a mockery out of it. Before he could retrieve his spear to defend himself, Zen had already approached him. Judging by the situation Khalid was in, it wouldn't be wise to retreat. He decided to take the risk and remain where he stood. The skull in his right hand began to rattle in response to his ordeal. At the same time, a solid beam of brown light swirled around the tip of the spear. He was planning to retaliate with a more powerful strike than before. Watching Zen close the distance between himself and them, Mount and Maya took caution to the situation and became serious. They blamed Khalid in their hearts for provoking an avoidable scenario because of his impulse. Even so, they had to do something to stop Zen. If Khalid were to die, the Bearing race would suffer an incalculable loss. They couldn't just stand by and let this happen. Boom! Mount's body underwent violent tremors, and then a layer of gold light surged out of his tanned skin. The outburst of energy from his body resembled that of a sturdy mountain. On the other hand, Maya ascended to the sky and stationed herself behind Mount. A loud cracking sound of bones resounded in the air around her as her right hand broke itself. From the joint of her elbow, a small puppet emerged as it floated above it. It was her other shore token. The puppet appeared to have been connected to her body with her forearm. Its appearance was nothing short of creepy. Zen showed no signs of hesitation even though he knew he would have to take on all three of them at once. He was determined to tear Qartulad into pieces no matter the circumstances. Before the both sides could confront each other, the eyes of the sculptures in the cave suddenly opened. Chapter 2994, The Purpose. The moment those huge eyes opened, everyone in the cave felt as if their hearts were clenched in an icy grip. They quavered in fear. Some of them could feel a sharp sword pointed at their foreheads. If the sword were to be thrust 1 inch closer, it would pierce their skulls and they would die. Some of the people in the cave could see they were surrounded by skeletons. This was frightening. Had they arrived in the death world, where no living being existed? Were they doomed to become like the skeletons? Most of them covered their heads with their hands, horrified. Naturally, they thought they were going to die. Although most of them had been through many dangers, now, they were terror-stricken. Each of them felt like they were at death's door, knocking loudly. Even Zen and Qartulad, possessing the powerful souls of light, were not immune to this fear. Zen had to retreat after he landed, and at the same time fight against the fear of the dreaded eye demon with his strong will. Zen had gone through something like this before in the sacred Mallow Temple. At that time, after number 9527 prompted him, he was able to shut it out using the emotion-closing godly way. However, the fear which descended on him now was many times stronger than what he encountered in the sacred Mallow Temple. The emotion-closing godly way was unable to banish the fright. Flow strike. Desperate for a solution, Zen pulled out another one of his skills, the flow swordsmanship. The flow strike was regarded as an extension of the emotion-closing godly way, with a meditation component. It was a more effective way of cultivating the heart. While staying in the flow sword sect, Zen had come a long way as far as his training went. But the mind method of the flow swordsmanship had little effect on that fear. He was unable to completely erase it. The others were even worse. Most of them prostrated themselves on the ground. Some of them were looking ashen, some were trembling and the rest were crying bitterly. Yan stood still with a confused look, as if she were also using some kind of mental method to filter out the fear. At the top of the main peak, the dark and red lights continued to flicker on the surface of the giant eye. The giant eye was the source of the fear, naturally emanating it and affecting everyone. Both Zen and Qartulad were targets chosen by the eye and the mother of the chaotic source spirits. It did not want anything to go wrong in the fight between those two. However, Qartulad reacted recklessly. When the battle began, the giant eye had to interfere. "What if they find out about your meddling?" asked the mother of the chaotic source spirits. She was afraid they would escape, and leave the chaotic source world. After all, no one was willing to let their prey run away like that. "There shouldn't be a problem," the giant eye replied. "They haven't acquired enough chaotic source spirits, so they won't put a halt to the competition and take off." The giant eye wasn't willing to reveal its ability now, but it had no choice. Buzz. The light in its pupil lasted for 30 seconds before it disappeared and the eye went back to its former condition. The red and white lights slowly revolved around its pupil. In the middle of the main peak, many members and disciples from different races, who thought they were on the verge of death, found that the fear had suddenly dissipated and they stood up with strange expressions. "What was that? It scared me. I thought I was going to die." The fear made people feel like they were taking a walking tour of torture, and they glistened with sweat. "Uncle Mount, that power of fear is from the truth of goodwill and malice." "But what kind of thing is it? Why could it affect so many people?" Maya asked in confusion. Maya knew the truth of goodwill and malice very well, as she cultivated it. After reaching the consummate level of the truth of goodwill and malice, she could also frighten a large number of creatures. If one had a weak soul, they would be frightened to death. However, for the souls of light that had reached the other shore, that effect was simply negligible. Ordinary warriors were immune, unless she was able to fuse with a related other shore token, or to cultivate the theurgy of this aspect. Mount was powerful and smart. As far as Maya was concerned, there was nothing that Mount didn't know. That's the dreaded eye demon. It was a mighty ruling force in the past, but the force didn't fare well on the other shore and the dreaded eye demons are almost extinct, Mount replied flatly. "So why is it here?" Maya asked. In Maya's eyes, both the items and living creatures on the other shore should use a medium to descend in the source world. The medium was the inner world of a powerful other shore realm warrior. "I don't know," Mount answered with a frown. In fact, the chaotic source spirits had already broken with routine and lived in the chaotic source world in a special form. Essentially, the chaotic source spirits were also the creatures of the other shore. Why were the chaotic source spirits different from other creatures on the other shore? Every super force had looked into that, but the reason had not been found. It could be said that it was completely against the truth when the chaotic source spirits lived in a special form like that. Once they found out why, the strong existences hiding on the other shore and the powerful masters of the ruling civilizations would probably be able to return to the source world, and even the chaos. After Zen regained consciousness, he just stared at Khalid coldly. He thought of killing Khalid, but then the fear rose in him. This was not a coincidence. Knowing this, Zen ventured a guess. What had just happened was obvious to him now. A dreaded eye demon must be hovering on top of the main peak. That monster was much stronger than the Eye of Will Zen had fused with. Why did it stop me from killing Khalid? Or did it just stop me from fighting him? Zen thought it must be the latter. But why? It was the first time that Khalid had entered the chaotic source world. He didn't seem to know anything about that either. Why would the dreaded eye demon do that? Zen was consumed with figuring this out, and hesitated to act before he did. He and Yan led the members of the Pear Hill and the Oneness Sky Palace to retreat to the other side, distancing themselves from the members of the Bearing race. At this time, in another passageway, dozens of tall figures entered. They were from the separate Abyss race. The members of this race gathered and formed 3 teams in the chaotic source world. One of the teams encountered the evil god, while the other 2 teams banded together and climbed up the main peak. This time, the trip to the chaotic source world was not easy for them, and they were much more cautious as a result. Many separate Abyss warriors, over 100 feet tall, looked at the sculptures on the walls and gathered off to one side. More and more members of different races came into the cave through the passageways around it. Most were in groups, but there were some warriors who came there alone. For example, Milo from the Oneness Sky Palace explored the main peak all by himself. He remained in the chaotic source world for a long time, and now he finally threw in his lot with Zen and his companions. The chaotic source spirits must be hiding in the upper part of the cave. Let's just make our way up and dig them out. Yes, there is no place to hide except the upper part of the main peak. When there were more warriors in the cave, it became quite noisy inside. They talked about the best way to climb the mountain. As for the members of the separate Abyss race, they were impetuous. 2 of them flew up and shot toward the upper part of the cave with their huge bodies as large as the hills. However, when the 2 separate Abyss warriors just approached the top, they suddenly let out a scream, and fell down, holding their heads in their hands. They formed a huge crater when they smashed into the ground. Chapter 2995, One Last Chance. Everyone directed their gazes to the upper part of the cave. 2 eyes, the dreaded eye demons flickered with red light. They lingered for a long while before disappearing. What's going on? Is that the malicious stare? How could it be so powerful? The other races that entered the cave later hadn't experienced the soul-crushing fear. When they saw what happened to the 2 members of the separate Abyss race, they were all shocked. Those are sculptures of the dreaded eye demons. The malicious stare is way too powerful. Is there a strong dreaded eye demon in the main peak? Then how can we climb the mountain? These people were experienced and knowledgeable. They not only recognized the sculptures on the walls, but also guessed that the main peak was guarded by a dreaded eye demon. At a loss for what to do, everyone turned to the snake goddess race. Although the icy snow province was open to the public, it was still under the control of the Pear Hill. The other super forces might not know what had happened in the chaotic source world, but the people of the Pear Hill must know something. What happened in the chaotic source world? You should have let us know. Please tell us. If you keep silent, don't blame us for being rude. They had been in the chaotic source world for such a long time and explored the periphery and the 4 peaks but couldn't find many chaotic source spirits. Naturally, they were angry. Questioned by so many members of the myriad races, the people of the Pear Hill were under a lot of pressure. No matter how strong they were, they couldn't afford to anger that many people. At this time, Yan walked out at a casual pace and swept her gaze across the faces of those assembling there. The chaotic source sea and the chaotic source spirits are already out of control, she said. Hearing Yan's words, many of the other races had surprise written all over their faces. Some didn't understand what Yan was talking about, while some let thoughts flash across their minds. What do you mean? Someone asked. This is the last time the chaotic source world opens and the only chance for us to reach the chaotic source realm. If we miss it, we won't get a second chance, Yan replied faintly. What? How could that happen? Impossible. The chaotic source world has existed for eons. How could this be our last chance? The members of the other races were all shocked. To them, it didn't matter if they couldn't merge with the chaotic source spirits this time. The tickets to the chaotic source world were precious to ordinary people, but to these elites of the major races, they were nothing. If they failed this time, they'd try again. Where there was life, there was hope. In any case, life came first. Zen's face was also filled with surprise. He asked Yan, the chaotic source spirits constantly reproduce, don't they? Yan blinked her eyes and nodded. Yes, but since they're from the other shore, their bodies are left there. In the past, the chaotic source spirits were strictly controlled on the other shore, and the place where they were controlled was the chaotic source sea. Even if all the 200,000 chaotic source spirits were killed, the chaotic source world would be prosperous again, as long as the strong warriors went to the chaotic source sea and chose several other chaotic source spirits as parents. But now, after the chaotic source sea on the other shore had been occupied, there were no more parents. Once a chaotic source spirit was merged, there was one less existing in the source world. After hearing Yan's words, many of the races were excited. They had one last chance to reach the chaotic source realm. What happened in the main peak? Why are there sculptures of the dreaded eye demons here? Asked a member of the celestial wolf race. Yan shook her head and said, I don't know either. Put simply, if you want to reach the chaotic source realm, you have to go all out. Mount, Maya and the talented disciples of the various races wouldn't miss this chance. If they did miss that chance, it would be worse than death. That meant they'd never reach the chaotic source realm, no matter how long they lived. Yan's words sobered them up, and spurred a veritable brainstorm. They came up with many ideas. Originally, everyone was on edge, each race not trusting the others. But now, they were in a better mood. They were focused on a common goal. At this time, another figure appeared at an entrance of the cave. As soon as it appeared, an invisible malicious aura spread out like a giant beast baring its teeth and claws. Everyone looked over and found the young man in black standing at the cave entrance. Their faces sank. Evil God, how dare you show up here? A man in golden armor from the separate abyss race took 2 steps forward, one golden hammer in each hand, and his face was full of anger. His clansmen also stepped forward and formed a half-moon shape, presenting a united front against the evil god. They had never suffered such an egregious loss before. Nearly a third of their clansmen were slain by a young man. This was an affront that demanded blood for blood. When the other races saw the evil god, they also looked at him with hatred in their eyes. After the evil god entered the chaotic source world, he had already provoked many races by killing their clansmen for no reason. He did the same on the other shore. Even the super forces like the Bearing race and the separate abyss race could not escape his hatred. Someone had said that he would tear the evil god limb from limb if he found him in the source world, but the evil god's power was undiminished in the source world. Now that the evil god was outnumbered, the people assembling in the cave were not afraid of him. They were all elites of the major races. They didn't believe that the evil god could resist all of them alone. There was an indifferent smile on the evil god's face. The wave's blending energy gathered slowly in his right hand and coalesced into a diamond-shaped gem, which glinted evilly. Even facing so many strong warriors, he remained calm. Some of the creatures looking at him were very nervous. What was he playing at? Seeing the restless members of the separate abyss race about to rush forward, Khalid of the Bearing race reminded them, Hamza. If we fight here, we will risk activating the malicious stare. Hamza was one of the strongest of the separate abyss race. Although he didn't want to fight the evil god, the separate abyss race had been humiliated. So he had to fight. Really? Hearing Khalid's words, Hamza frowned. We've already been through this. Khalid cupped his hands and told Hamza what happened just now. The members of the separate abyss race were arrogant. They didn't hang out with the Bearing race. However, Khalid still hoped they could form an alliance with the separate abyss race. He warned them kindly because he wanted them on his side. After thinking it over, Hamza stared ferociously at the evil god and led his clansmen to the side. Everyone could see a fight between the separate abyss race and the evil god was brewing. Chapter 2996, Shut Up. The evil god emerged from the passageway, greeting Zen with a smug smile. Zen faced this creation of his with a look of indifference. The evil god was a creature born from his inner world, so it was only a given that Zen knew everything about him. From his birth to his growth, Zen knew every single detail. All the information would gather together in his mind with only a single thought. You've made a big mistake, Zen hissed. His creation merely continued smiling at him. What is it? You should have never used Dorothy to provoke me. Zen snarled with white-hot rage. Dorothy couldn't help but purse her lips. She had fought with this creation of Zen's before and knew very well how terrifying he was. The evil god had chosen to spare her life at the last moment, and Dorothy caught on pretty quickly as to why. He wanted to use her to provoke Zen. She trusted Zen's strength wholeheartedly, but she didn't want him to get into this potentially dangerous fight just because of her. Moreover, the current situation was skewed to the evil god's favor. If Zen was defeated by the evil god, he would only end in death. It was nice to be saved by Zen, but she wasn't as relieved as she should be. In fact, she was very worried. Zen was wholly determined to fight for her and would not back down from this fight with the evil god. It warmed her heart, but it was quickly overtaken with worry for Zen's life. Tisk, tisk, tisk. The evil god shook his head with a smile. You seem really eager to destroy me. You never should have existed in the first place, Zen countered. This creation of his was a freak, and Zen was still at a loss as to how such a vile creature appeared in his inner world. Other people didn't seem to have this problem. Why him? Did it have anything to do with the primitive land? The evil god let out a maniacal laugh. My existence wasn't decided by you. Not even this round of chaos can decide my birth. I am destined to transcend everything while you. He paused to glare at Zen with his two evil eyes. You are merely destined to be my stepping stone. His daring insults caused the various races to frown. There was truly no limit to the evil god's arrogance. Destined to transcend everything, even if he came from the black ship, he was not qualified to say something like that. What in the world made him so confident to say those words? Shut up, Yan shouted in frustration. Her yell seemed to hold some power as light suddenly shot out from her and towards the evil god at shockingly fast speed. It was the word spirit nurtured by Yan. The truth of holy words was a very special type of truth of godly way. Only a few people were suited to cultivating it, even in the source world. Yan was one of these few people and was even regarded as one of the best in cultivating the truth of holy words. Upon reaching the consummate level of the truth of holy words, a warrior would then gain the ability to form their own word spirits. These word spirits were then nurtured, cared for so that they grew strong. Yan had been greatly favored by the snake goddess on Pear Hill. When Fuxi arrived, she managed to gain the guidance of two able masters and strengthened her word spirit to an unimaginable level. Despite this, however, Yan did not use it that often. Powerful word spirits could kill people with a single word from their masters. The more powerful ones were even said to make words come true, words that had the ability to change the course of destiny. This sudden move from Yan caught the evil god by surprise. As soon as she said, "Shut up," the word spirit came at him and sewed his lips shut. You are a mere secondary creature from my brother's inner world, and that's all you will ever be. Do you really think those people from the black ship can make you invincible? The world isn't anything that a secondary creature like you could ever imagine. Yan lashed out this bitter, cruel truth in the evil god's silence. She could see him thrash, trying to refute all that she said, but he couldn't, not when her word spirit attacked him like that. He was too proud, too arrogant, and not just to his enemies. He treated even those from the black ship like Shira as nothing more than dirt underneath his shoe. Anyone who dared speak against him was dealt with ruthlessly. Yan, however, could care less. She mocked him non-stop, and the evil god's face progressively got redder in rage. A killing intent surged from his body as he poised himself for an attack. However, as soon as the killing intent burst out of him, a demon red light flashed above his head. There was no way he would be allowed to kill in here. Yan was the chosen one by the giant eye. It measured the evil god's strength and prevented him from attacking her. At that moment, the evil god's body was engulfed with ice-cold fear. Despite feigning invincibility, the evil god had weaknesses in his soul, much like everyone else. As this overwhelming power of fear escalated, his body began to weigh him down and his face contorted in pain. That said though, he still had a far stronger pain threshold than any normal warrior. Despite being in great pain, he continued to resist this power that had taken over him. Step back, Yan, Zen warned, standing in front of his sister protectively. I'm not afraid of him, she protested. Yan wanted to prove to him that she was strong enough to take care of herself. Meanwhile, the evil god continued to fight off the power of fear, his face muscles twitching as he did so. He looked ferociously grotesque as he used the soul force to resist. This horrifying scene shocked the members of the separate Abyss race, the Bearing race, and the Divine Farmer race. They too had suffered a lot after encountering the power of fear released by the dreaded eye demon and knew just how horrible it was. It didn't physically hurt, but the pressure on one's mind was overwhelming. Even Zen was surprised at how hard the evil god resisted. Back when Zen was engulfed with the maximum power of fear emanating from 100 or so sculptures, he shared the overwhelming pressure with the Bearing race, the Divine Farmer race, the Pear Hill, and others. Even so, it proved to be extremely difficult even with the use of the flow swordsmanship. Only a dozen sculptures were activated this time, but it should be noted that the evil god was taking it all by himself. This proved the incredible strength of his soul force. Zen was definitely not going to let him do whatever he wanted outside the chaotic source world. In fact, he was even more determined to put him right back into his inner world where he belonged. They weren't the only ones astonished by this display of resilience. Even the giant eye on top of the cave was shocked. Interesting, interesting. Here comes another incredible talent, someone who can resist my power of fear. Resist your power of fear? The mother of the chaotic source spirits asked. If you can't subdue him, then wouldn't that mean trouble for us? For the past 10 years, the chaotic source spirits had been growing in power by devouring each other, as intended by the mother. However, they all relied on the giant eye. If it turned out that not even the giant eye could suppress the evil god, then that was definitely going to be bad for them, which made the mother of the chaotic source spirits quite concerned. Humph! The giant eye snorted in disdain through consciousness as the red light shone brighter. More and more sculptures were activated, releasing waves upon waves of power of fear. All of it was directed at the evil god, and even the people who were very close to the evil god were not affected at all. Chapter 2997, Break the Main Peak. Boom! The force of fear swept like tidal waves over the evil god. As the evil god struggled, bombarded by the full force of fear, his face twisted with pain and terror. The force of fear was a special form of soul attack. Even the strongest souls had flawed hearts, and the force inevitably found the flaw and used it to release all the fear in their hearts. Despite the rapid increase in the force of fear that attacked him, the evil god managed to hold on for several seconds before he collapsed onto the ground. The relationship between the races in the cave was a little complicated, but they all had one thing in common. Everyone hated the evil god to the core. Thus, the sight of the evil god falling to the ground should have made them clap their hands and cheer. On the contrary, however, everyone was silent. Some looked solemn, while others wore expressions of deep wariness. The evil god had a powerful soul, but he couldn't resist the force of fear. How could they reach the upper part of the main peak? After a while, the red light vanished. Being punished by the force of fear, the evil god finally calmed down after managing to stand up. He said nothing, but his face was etched with grimness. He looked around him with eyes filled with suspicion and doubt. The evil god had seldom been beaten since he entered the source world. He did not know who had employed the force of fear, but he vowed that he would find out and take his revenge. The force of fear is so strong. We are no match for whoever employed it. How can we continue to climb up? Someone asked in a worried tone. Mount replied, even if we manage to climb up, we will find it difficult to defeat those chaotic source spirits if we are suppressed by the force of fear. The main peak was very dangerous to climb, even without taking any other factors into considerations. They also had the chaotic source spirits to contend with. After these spirits swallowed each other, their strength increased significantly, and they posed a huge risk for anyone who dared to climb the main peak. We can't return empty-handed, someone said gloomily. Everyone fell silent, wondering what would be the best course of action. Yan had said that if they missed this opportunity, it would be impossible for any of them to reach the chaotic source realm in the future. No one was willing to turn back at this point without anything to show for it. As they discussed the matter, they were interrupted by a sharp, cracking sound. They looked up. The sound was coming from the top of the cave. The sculptures on the roof of the cave seemed to have gotten loose, and cracks had appeared on the surface. 3 staircases extended down from where the cracks had appeared. The base of one of the staircases was right next to the huddled disciples of the Oneness Sky Palace. Zen quickly went to the staircase and took a few steps up. He peered towards the top of the staircase, trying to see what lay ahead. But it was dark and shadowed. No one could see what was there. Like Zen, everyone else was craning their necks, trying to get a look at the top of the stairs. However, no one but Zen had dared to place a foot on the steps. They weren't willing to risk facing whatever was up there. While they could only see darkness, they correctly sensed that some great danger lay in wait. Everyone present was well versed in the nature and tactics of fighting. While they didn't know what exactly the chaotic source spirits were thinking, they could just imagine what they would suffer if they rashly marched up unprepared for what they were about to face. The evil god immediately knew what everyone was thinking. He stood still, looking around with a mocking smile. He said to everyone through his life vitality, like the rest of you, I don't know what's up there, but since they have invited us, it won't be difficult to find out. Zen, Maya, Khalid, Hamza and the others frowned. Maya stepped towards the evil god and said in a low voice, "How can you say that after you were tortured by the force of fear?" Maya and the rest of them knew how to fight visible enemies. They could defeat them effortlessly. After all, they all had powerful other shore tokens. Even if they encountered stronger masters at the other shore realm, they still had a fair chance to win any battle. For example, the evil god was powerful, but when the 4 members of the separate abyss race fought him together, he succumbed under their combined strength. This was the magic of the other shore tokens. If their abilities were combined perfectly, the power released would be increased tenfold or even 100-fold. But the top of the main peak held an enemy whose power was completely unfamiliar to them. The one attack they were sure to face, the force of fear, was something they couldn't resist. They were certain that if they went up right now, they would just end up getting killed. "If you think it's too dangerous to go up from here, maybe we can go up on the outside," the evil god suggested. Most of the warriors here were more used to following orders than thinking outside the box. They wanted to break through inside the main peak. In fact, there was another way up. They could fly to the top of the main peak outside. At the evil god's suggestion, many began nodding in agreement. "The hurricane outside is very strong," Maya objected. The evil god glanced at Maya and asked, "Haven't you ever dug holes in the ground?" Many creatures present had dug holes all the way from the edge of the chaotic source world, so they naturally understood what the evil god was trying to say. "Let's get out of here," Khalid proposed. This time, even more people nodded vigorously. The evil god's plan was better than the alternative. They were prepared to do as they were told. In order to get the chaotic source spirits, all of them had formed a temporary, tenuous alliance with each other, forming one large and unified group. The evil god laughed, "But there is another way. It is more simple, and it is the one I prefer." Everyone, including Zen, stared at the evil god in puzzlement and exasperation. They wondered what trick he was playing now. The main peak is very long and narrow in diameter. It's high, but not very bulky, so if we work together, we might be able to break it. "What do you think?" the evil god asked slyly. Everyone began speaking at once, looking surprised at the evil god's solution. "Break the main peak. What a bold idea. Do the people of the Pear Hill agree?" As they said, this is the last time the chaotic source world opens, and there will be no chaotic source spirits in the future. Who cares if we break the main peak? They quickly grasped that getting to the top from the outside was only a slightly better choice than just going up the stairs. In either case, they would still be passively entering an unknown situation. It was definitely a much better choice to break the main peak directly. Everyone turned to look questioningly at the people of the Pear Hill. Before Yan could speak, Natalie said with a shrug, "Our masters didn't tell us specifically what to do. They let us play it by ear." Hamza said, "In that case, we can do as he said. But, I wonder if there is a hurricane outside now." He thought breaking the main peak was an excellent plan, but he worried that everyone would just be swept away by the hurricane if they did that. "Some of my clansmen keep watch outside," said a non-human creature covered in something green. "The hurricane will stop at any moment." Seeing that everyone was eager for action, the evil god smirked. "Then let's get started. Remember, we only have one chance to do this right." The evil god and the others had all been conversing through their life vitality, so the mother of the chaotic source spirits and the giant eye at the top couldn't hear them. The giant eye was narrowed in doubt. Through its consciousness, it said, "What are they waiting for? Why don't they go up the stairs?" "They are cowards," said the mother of the chaotic source spirits contemptuously. Firmly she added, "But they won't give up this opportunity." At that moment, the pupil of the giant eye suddenly shrank. Oh no, the scarlet force of fear spiraled in the pupil. However, before it could be released, a violent roar came from below. The crowd eager to get to the top was comprised of a powerful and diverse group of warriors. Their combined power could not be underestimated. Most of them could control a level of strength up to 1,000 divine megatons. Some could easily control an even greater level of strength, especially those from the separate abyss race. By virtue of their perfect bodies, even if they did not reach the chaotic source realm, the strength they exerted was comparable to that of the said realm. A rumbling sound echoed as the main peak trembled. A second later, the middle part of the main peak suddenly shook violently, as though it was being torn by an earthquake. Chapter 2998, Joining Hands for the Moment. In the middle of the ring-shaped mountain range, some creatures had gathered in the arrays surrounding the main peak. Not wanting to risk their lives, they didn't dare step outside of the arrays. At least within the arrays, they could seek some shelter from the terrible hurricane. Rumble. Suddenly, the center of the main peak exploded in a cloud of smoke and dust. The creatures huddled in the arrays widened their eyes in shock. What happened in the main peak? Such strength. It cracks. It cracks. The main peak is about to collapse. When the dust cleared, they saw a huge crack in the middle of the main peak, and it was growing rapidly. The entire ring-shaped mountain range quaked as the cracks crawled towards its edges. The main peak, which was up to 1,000,000 feet high, slowly began to tilt to one side. The tip of the peak suddenly broke off, crashing into the east side of the ring-shaped mountain range, destroying that as well. The creatures who were gathered in the arrays stood motionless before the scene that was unfolding, dumbfounded. Only the other half of the main peak was left, rendering the once towering mountain now an almost flattened plain. Naturally, the bystanders were stunned. The chaotic source spirits lurking in the upper part of the main peak began to stir as they sensed this change. While they didn't know what was going on exactly, they couldn't calm down until the mother comforted them. "Is this your plan?" the mother of the chaotic source spirits asked pointedly. The giant eye floating inside the main peak began to emanate a depressed aura. It had just wanted the foolish young talents to take the bait. It had never expected that the creatures would not climb up the stairs, instead, they had sliced off the main peak. "Don't panic, they have to come inside if they want to take the chaotic source spirits." The giant eye reassured the mother of the chaotic source spirits through its consciousness. After the collapse of the main peak, the force of fear that restrained people also disappeared. All the races grew even more cautious. Besides, they couldn't lower their guard against the evil god. Zen stood in front of the disciples of the Oneness Sky Palace and the members of the Snake Goddess race. In his inner world, the Eye of Will, the Strength God Totem and that civilization artifact quietly floated. On the other hand, Qartulad, Mount and Maya didn't plan to take any action. Killing the disciples from the Oneness Sky Palace was important to them, but getting enough chaotic source spirits for the chaotic source reinforcement was more important at the moment. Nobody knew what was lurking in the main peak. But they knew that they needed to join forces with everyone in order to defeat it first. Everyone seemed to be lost in their own thoughts, trying to figure out what to do next. On the contrary, the evil god was the calmest. With a mischievous smile creeping around his lips, he broke the ice. "The main peak has collapsed now. What are you so worried about?" Hearing this, the others looked at him, speechless. Hamza from the Separate Abyss race mocked bitterly in his heart. "He's talking nonsense. He's the biggest threat to us now." All the others silently shared the sentiments. They were afraid this lunatic would stab them in the back. "Let's go, Zen," Yan suddenly said, as she shot the evil god a cold glance. She had always hated that guy. Compared to the others, Yan was not that afraid of the evil god. Zen nodded and gestured to the disciples from the Oneness Sky Palace, telling them to fly down from the top of the broken mountain. As the Oneness Sky Palace and the Pear Hill took the lead, members of other small forces also followed closely behind. Then the Bearing race, the Sun Crow race and the Separate Abyss race followed on their heels. The last few races picked up the pace. No one was willing to stay with the evil god. The evil god kept sitting there, unmoving. However, the chaotic source reinforcement also mattered to him. He might have been insane, but he was no idiot. It wouldn't be late for him to deal with them after he obtained enough chaotic source spirits. As soon as the main peak fell, the races who had taken shelter in the arrays slowly started coming out, one after the other. Since the chaotic source spirits were hidden in the main peak, now was their chance to find some. Arriving at the foot of the main peak, Zen announced, "We won't go in. We can attack it from the outside." As he spoke, his eyes narrowed slightly. Activating the authentic visual world of the Eye of Will, he saw all the flaws on the main peak, as clear as day. Whoosh! Waving the snow sword lightly, he shot out a sword radiance to chop at the main peak's flaws. Crack! Suddenly, a large crack ripped through a corner of the main peak, shattering boulders as it went. However, the main peak was extremely huge. Although there were many flaws, they were not concentrated to one area. Even if Zen could see and cut the flaws, it'd take him an eternity before he destroyed them all. Yan pressed her hands together, seemingly in prayer. Then, the blood-red shadow of the Snake Goddess appeared behind her. The hands of the shadow of Snake Goddess stretched out, sending out countless streaks of pure red energy. Every time a streak of energy whipped downwards, it'd destroy multitudes of rocks in the peak. Yan isn't relying on any other sure token, Zen pondered in awe. Instead, she summoned the shadow of the Snake Goddess, which could burst out over 1,000 divine megatons of force. He nodded in approval. Yan had grown stronger than he expected in the Pear Hill. Zen suspected that she might have fused with a good other shore token. That was why she had no intention of giving in when facing the evil god. Meanwhile, the members of the snake goddess race launched themselves into the air and activated their other shore tokens, casting terrifying energy on the main peak one after another. Behind them, many races like the Bearing race, the Sun Crow race, the Divine Farmer race, the Separate Abyss race and the Celestial Wolf race also joined in the attack. In order to obtain the chaotic source spirits, they had all unanimously decided to cast aside their differences. That giant eye in the main peak was distressed by this scene. "Didn't you say they would come in anyway?" the mother of the chaotic source spirits complained. "Let the chaotic source spirits fight against them for a bit," the giant eye advised. "I've already sent them there. Although we can hold them off for a while, we will eventually be exhausted," the mother of the chaotic source spirit said dejectedly. The half-peak that had fallen to the ground was like a dead giant, suffering the attacks of the crowd. Each stream of energy ruthlessly ripped open a piece of flesh of the giant. However, as the chaotic source spirits cruised inside the body of the peak, suddenly the entire main peak solidified into a smooth, shiny surface with no imperfections, not even a hairline crack. "It's the chaotic source spirits. They are in the rocks. Dig them out," people cried out excitedly. They had all dug out several chaotic source spirits before, so this was like a beacon of hope to them. Together, they attacked the rocks more fiercely. Bang, 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 splash. With so many people joining hands, an extremely terrifying amount of force was unleashed onto the peak. Having been attacked mercilessly, the chaotic source spirits lurking in the mountain quickly fell into a state of exhaustion. The originally solid mountain body began to buckle and crack again. Yan was the quickest of them to notice. The moment she discovered a crack, she channeled the red threads of energy from the arms of the shadow of snake goddess to get into the crack. With a flick of her wrist, she pulled out more than 100 chaotic source spirits. Chapter 2999, The Mother emerged. At that moment, the various races broke into gasps when they saw the chaotic source spirits. After all, they had roamed across the chaotic source world for a really long time, but harvested very little. There were some lucky ones who were able to get dozens of chaotic source spirits, but the others got nothing. To their surprise, Yan actually drew out 100 chaotic source spirits. Of course, it made everyone excited. "Everyone, come on. As long as the mountain wall is broken, we can dig out chaotic source spirits." Bang. Generally speaking, the chaotic source spirits reinforced anything they had been integrated with to a great extent. If they were continuously battered, however, they quickly became exhausted. It was known that there was a large amount of the chaotic source spirits in the mountain. Crack. Just then, a new crack appeared on the mountain wall. This time, Maya, the genius of the Divine Farmer race, was quick to act. In a blink of an eye, her long curly hair extended up into the crack and with a slight twist, her hair had killed the chaotic source spirits hiding inside the crack. After they were stripped of their blood and flesh, her hair had pulled out dozens of amber crystals. Sure enough, all the chaotic source spirits are in there. Everybody, charge up. Even the warriors who hesitated to move couldn't sit still anymore. They all descended and stood on the mountain wall of the main peak, then smashed and punched the wall like mad. All they needed was for the chaotic source spirits inside the mountain to get tired, then the warriors simply had to reach through the cracks and pull the chaotic source spirits out. After the warriors killed them, they stripped the amber-colored crystals from their bodies and put the crystals into their space rings. The chaotic source spirits were a kind of living beings, and they also referred to the crystals in their bodies. "How savage are these warriors," Zen said and shook his head. Then again, Yan's method, which consisted of inserting her energy threads in the crack then instantly evaporating the blood, flesh, and bones of the chaotic source spirits was no different. Her method of killing them was also bloody. There was nothing the chaotic source spirits could do to ease their tragic fate. The warriors outside the mountain continued to dig happily, while the mother of the chaotic source spirits and the huge eye who were hiding inside were in deep agony. "These creatures, they have gone too far this year." Resentment filled the black eyes of the mother of the chaotic source spirits. Trapped in the chaotic source world, the chaotic source spirits were like meat on the chopping block. Meanwhile, such a way of cultivation was like a game and also a trial for the geniuses of the super forces. The mother of the chaotic source spirits, however, had been trying her best to save the creatures of her own race since she had gained wisdom. She summoned a considerable number of the chaotic source spirits and gathered them all together at the main peak. If anyone dared to enter the main peak, they absolutely fought back. Her efforts did work. Now, almost no one dared to enter the main peak. In addition, she only needed to sacrifice more than half of the chaotic source spirits every 10 years to keep the rest safe. The giant eye came up with such a trick this time, but it was not helpful at all. What was worse was that the whole main peak was destroyed, which was the last thing she wanted to see. The huge eye stared at what happened outside in silence. If this goes on, we will lose more of our chaotic source spirits, and we will only be weaker and weaker. What should we do? The mother of the chaotic source spirits cried out and urged for a solution. We have no choice but to fight our way out, said the huge eye through its consciousness. As it spoke, a sharp light flashed deep inside of its eyeball. The descent of the huge eye was such a well-kept secret that even the people of the Pear Hill hadn't noticed it. Although the Pear Hill was in charge of the operation of the chaotic source world, they rarely entered the core area. If the two of them rushed out, their plan would probably be ruined. At the same time, they would be beaten passively if they stayed hidden inside. The mother of the chaotic source spirits had long harbored a grudge against the creatures outside. When she heard what the huge eye had said, she immediately gave an order. Outside the main peak, the members of different races and disciples of various forces continued to plunder the chaotic source spirits. Later on, some of the warriors who were wandering in the periphery of the chaotic source world also joined them when they arrived. At that point, the dark smog in the sky surged again. It meant that the hurricane was about to come. Hurricane is coming, someone shouted. The creatures who were gathered at the top of the main peak heard the warning, and quickly retreated. Some hid in arrays, and some had dug holes in the ground and hid inside, waiting for the hurricane to pass. Outside the chaotic source world, the leaders didn't know whether to cry or laugh when they saw the scene. They actually didn't know what happened at first. They thought it was strange that no one went to the arrays to receive chaotic source reinforcement. When they finally saw them retreat from the 4 mountain peaks, they immediately understood what was going on. They never expected that all the warriors would break the main peak with joint forces. Fortunately, the various races didn't lose many of their key figures. The current situation was just fine as they looked at it. As soon as the hurricane stopped, the warriors hiding in the holes flew up again and continued to attack the mountain wall. A member of the separate abyss race stepped directly on the mountain wall. There was a layer of extremely sharp cyan light floating in his hands. He pounded the wall with his fist several times, until the part of the wall he was hitting exploded. This one warrior cheered in delight, then enthusiastically buried his hands in the hole to take the chaotic source spirits inside. When he put his hands in, however, he saw 2 red eyes glow in the crack. The eagerness in his face was gone. He immediately kicked hard against the wall with his strong legs to try to distance himself from the mountain wall, but it was too late. Oh! A bright red thing emerged from the mountain wall. It was biting hard at the warrior of the separate abyss race, until it chomped on his head. The warrior twisted his strong body a few times in an attempt to escape, but he suddenly went limp. He eventually stopped moving. The warrior had a large build, so the chaotic source spirit couldn't swallow him at once completely. Things were even worse on the other side of the mountain wall. 2 warriors from the divine farmer race were also digging for chaotic source spirits until they saw the glowing red eyes inside. Before they could react, a large bloody mouth swallowed their whole bodies. In the blink of an eye, every race had lost several members who were devoured by the large bloody mouths. Retreat! The chaotic source spirits are coming out. I told you not to approach the mountain wall. Most people were still very cautious. Zen, Yan, Dorothy, and some others kept a distance from the mountain wall while they smashed it. When the chaotic source spirits emerged from the mountain wall, they lightly lifted their bodies and instantly distanced themselves from them. They finally came out, Zen said. He had warned the disciples of the Oneness Sky Palace, the Pear Hill, and the Ear Mice not to get too close through chaotic energy. If too many chaotic source spirits were lost, the rest of them would definitely rush out and fight for their lives. Now, his prediction was right. Therefore, none of the members of the Oneness Sky Palace, the Pear Hill, or even the Ear Mice got injured. Crack, crack, on the mountain wall, the large-sized chaotic source spirits finally got out of the cracks. In addition to their size, they also exuded a malicious aura. Yet, they didn't attack immediately. They remained attached to the mountain wall and just leered at the creatures above them with hatred. Crack! Suddenly, a bigger crack ruptured and split the top of the main peak in half. It immediately caught the attention of all the creatures around. The moment the broken mountain top fell, a huge eyeball emerged, and beside it was an enormous chaotic source spirit that measured 10,000 feet high. Everyone's eyes were transfixed on the huge chaotic source spirit. At the same time, they all thought of the same thing: it must be the mother of all the chaotic source spirits. Chapter 3000. A bloody eye. Everyone was on their guard. They were wary not only of the mother of the chaotic source spirits, but also of the huge eye. As they had felt the force of fear in the cave that contained many sculptures before, they assumed that it would be waiting for them in the main peak. They had been well prepared and already known what to expect, but they were still dumbfounded when the huge eye came into their view. Whoosh, 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 every creature from all of the races retreated at the sight that greeted them. The warriors that had hidden in the arrays before had been disheartened at their own weakness. The moment they saw the mother of chaotic source spirits, they immediately fled for their lives. They turned back to the direction they came from and flew directly towards the nearest magic arrays. Now that you have forced us out, you can't turn your backs on us. A flash of red light came from the huge eye, and suddenly, a circle of bloodlines radiated out from it at an incredible speed. When everyone felt the bloodlines sweep over their skin, their hearts skipped a beat. The bloodlines had already spread out over an area with a radius of 100,000 feet in the time it took them to blink. The magic array closest to them was right outside the perimeter of the bloodlines. A few individuals braced themselves and rushed towards the magic array. This particular array was set up by several powerful masters. They believed that as long as they hid within it, it would protect them. But even a slight contact of their fingers with the bloodlines sent a sensation similar to an electric shock through their bodies. They felt the force of fear spike within their hearts, triggering their psychological flaws. Those with weak constitutions lost their minds, some cried out helplessly in an attempt to vent their emotions. In the end, they had no choice but to leave the bloodlines. When Zen's group saw the bloodlines, their eyes narrowed. They realized that the huge eye had limited everyone's movement, and essentially trapped all of them. It was obvious that the chaotic source spirits and the giant eye were very complacent regarding their own strength, and they had no doubt that they would be able to kill everyone. After the main peak had collapsed, the evil god had been wandering around as if he didn't have a care in the world. When the huge eye and the mother of chaotic source spirits showed up, his interest was piqued greatly. The problem was, he was far away from them. The bloodlines had not been able to reach his location, so he approached the very edge of the bloodlines' territory. The giant eye's force of fear is extremely terrifying, but it won't last long. The evil god fixed his gaze on the bloodlines below him. He strode towards them with something like excitement and curiosity mixed together. The moment he came in contact with the bloodlines, the force of fear shot straight into his heart. His face scrunched into a frown and his eyes flashed with an unusual color. He braced himself against the force of fear and endured its attacks. He walked over them with a sense of realization. It's just as I expected. The evil god raised the corners of his mouth slightly, with a look as if he had everything in full control. The stronger the other shore tokens are, the weaker their own strength is. You are too confident in your power. The evil god was not one to be easily fazed. He had wanted to make his move back in the cave of the main peak, but he was hindered by the force of fear. It was from that moment that he became determined to find out whatever being was controlling the force of fear. After the main peak was cut off and the huge eye forcibly materialized, the evil god was determined to not let it go. He knew his analysis and evaluation were correct. Some other shore tokens provided people with abilities they didn't previously have, and some of them were extraordinary. As an example, the mysterious type of other shore tokens provided abilities that their opponents couldn't guard against. Some, like the Eye of Will and the Heart of Accomplice, had extraordinary abilities, but their other shore power was actually extremely weak. The huge eye had the ability of the malicious stare. It was terrifying, but it clearly was not powerful. When the warriors outside of the chaotic source world saw that their clansmen were trapped, they were in an uproar. Why did an Eye of Will appear in the chaotic source world? Pear Hill, please give us an explanation. Open the chaotic source world and let us go inside. The younger generation were more reckless than the leaders of the super forces, their lack of experience lending them a false bravado. It was extremely rare for the dreaded eye demons to be seen on the other shore, but it wasn't a mystery where they came from. After all, they used to be one of the ruling civilizations. At that moment, the mother of the chaotic source spirits had rushed out of the mountain, together with the Eye of Will. The younger generation couldn't resist them, no matter how powerful they were. Athamar's and Winchel's expressions had become grim. The Pear Hill was the one in charge of monitoring the chaotic source world. Was the Pear Hill aware of what was happening? If they were, why did they permit them to go inside? More importantly, other shore tokens only existed in the source world when they were carried by creatures in their inner worlds. The only exception had been the chaotic source spirits with a special form. So, how did the huge eye appear in the source world like the chaotic source spirits? This had defied all notions of common sense. Elizabeth spread her wings majestically and launched towards the gate leading to the chaotic source world. A tongue of flame curled upwards and released a scorching aura. Coldly, Elizabeth said, "Let me through." The divine lair had a huge loss in the recent events, so Elizabeth wanted to make sure that her other clansmen had a chance to obtain the chaotic source spirits. The women of the Pear Hill who had been guarding the gate leered at Elizabeth coldly. One of them told her, "Aside from the young warriors who have been given tickets, we cannot allow anyone else to enter the chaotic source world." Elizabeth frowned unhappily and answered back, "Something unexpected has happened inside. If we do not intervene, all of them will die. This is not the first time that a large number of young people die in there, it often happens through the ages," the woman replied. "Our Pear Hill did not establish these rules alone. Emperor Charm of your race also contributed to it. If you try to get past us by force, don't blame us if we use force to restrain you." "You." Elizabeth gave the woman her fiercest glare, but she wasn't able to retort. Although she thought that the guards weren't seriously threatening, it would really be troublesome for her if she attacked the people from Pear Hill in the icy snow province. She had no choice but to give up. The other leaders of the super forces weren't able to do anything either. They could only place their best hopes on their clansmen, praying that they could survive their encounter with the mother of the chaotic source spirits and complete the chaotic source reinforcement. On the top of the snowy mountain, Fuxi was settled on the snow, giving no mind to the interior of the chaotic source world. He gazed far into the distance, skimming over the chaotic source world, and stopped at the boundary of the icy snow province. A thin space crack was slowly enlarging there. Several sharp claws insidiously extended from inside the space crack. A small bloody eye was on top of them. The creature inside the space crack was very good at hiding itself. Even if the space had been torn apart, its aura was undetectable, as if it could perfectly merge with the space. Such a hiding Thurgy is truly extraordinary. If I hadn't used the 8 diagrams disk for calculation, I wouldn't have detected this, Fuxi muttered silently. "Let me see what your intentions are." The Pear Hill had not been able to see the changes within the chaotic source world in the beginning. It was not until what had happened in the chaotic source sea that Fuxi had used the 8 diagrams disk for his calculations and found out the truth. He had also incidentally discovered the Eye of Will in the main peak of the chaotic source world. The Eye of Will was another shore token, and as such, people of the Pear Hill knew that it should not have existed in the source world without a carrier. If it was true that the other shore tokens could exist in the chaos without carriers, it would mean trouble for the entire source world. It seemed that the situation in the chaos was about to change phenomenally.